Chapter 1, Prologue. The heart monitor was the only thing speaking, and it didn't have anything good to say. Beep, 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 p. In bed 402, Haruto Akagi was fading. At 11 years old, he was quirkless, with cancer that had found a home in a body with no supernatural defenses to kick it out. "I'm so sorry, Hana-san," the doctor whispered, his voice heavy. "There's simply nothing left to try." Hana Akagi didn't scream. She collapsed. Her forehead hit the edge of the mattress, her hands clutching her son's small fingers, her tears began to soak into the white sheets. Then, the reboot happened. Inside Haruto's mind, the darkness wasn't empty. It was a crowded highway at rush hour. 3 lives slammed together like tectonic plates. First, a lifetime of scarred tissue and gunpowder from a man who refused to die. Second, a lifetime of glowing screens and the encyclopedic knowledge of a world where Musudafo was a setting in a manga. Third, an 11-year-old boy who just wanted to see his mother smile. The memories merged. Haruto's eyes snapped open. The dull, glazed look of a terminal patient was gone, replaced by terrifying clarity. Wow, okay. That was a lot. How do I suddenly have memories of lives I never lived? It's like my brain just got hit by a high-speed train carrying 3 different boxcars of baggage. He felt a sudden, violent surge in his chest. Wait, he thought, his mind racing. I know this feeling. The itch under the skin. The smell of ozone and copper. He looked down at his own pale arms. The tumors, previously the kings of the castle, were being systematically hunted by a force that didn't care about biology or medical impossibility. Holy crap, he realized, a manic spark lighting up his eyes. I've got the big H in here. My baby, my poor, sweet Haruto. Hana sobbed into the bed sheets, unaware that the boy she was mourning was currently experiencing a cosmic hardware upgrade. Haruto reached out and patted his mother's head. "Hey, Mom? Take it easy on the waterworks," he said, his voice cracking but carrying a steady rhythm. "If you keep crying like that, the animators are going to spend the whole budget on your tear tracks and I'll end up being drawn as a stick figure in the next episode." The sobbing stopped instantly. Dr. Tanaka's jaw dropped. The room went deathly silent. "Haruto?" Hana whispered, looking up with eyes blurred by tears. What are you talking about?" "And Doc?" Haruto pointed a finger at the man's clipboard. "Your data is a little outdated. I just checked my internal settings, and I'm currently too awesome to die. It's a very rare condition. Highly contagious." Hana let out a choked, broken laugh. She saw the crooked grin on her son's face as a tragic shield against the trauma. "Oh, Haruto," she wailed, throwing her arms around him and pulling him into a crushing embrace. "You don't have to be brave for me." She wept harder now, her tears soaking his hospital gown. A day later, the door to the room hissed open. Dr. Tanaka walked in. He was staring at a fresh set of tablet results as if they were written in an alien language. "This is impossible," the doctor muttered, stopping at the foot of the bed. He looked between the boy, who was currently trying to see how far he could stretch his cheek, and the data. "The mutation, the stage 4 cells, they're gone. Not just retreating. They've been eradicated. Your white cell count is performing at a level that shouldn't be physically possible for a human." He looked at Hana, his voice trembling. "Hana-san, I don't know how to say this. If I didn't know better, I'd say his body just decided to stop losing." Haruto leaned back against his pillows, crossing his arms. "Told you, Doc. I'm a miracle. A high-budget, meta-breaking miracle. Now, can we talk about the hospital food? Because the jello here is a crime against humanity, and I'm pretty sure I have the constitutional right to a chimichanga." He turned his head to the camera again and winked. And so begins Volume 1. Buckle up, folks. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Chapter 2, The Ghost and the Medical Miracle. The ceiling of Haruto's bedroom was covered in glow-in-the-dark stars that had lost their luster years ago. Now, he lay on his back, tossing a kitchen knife into the air and catching it by the handle without looking. Flip. Catch. Flip. Catch. Downstairs, thump-scrape sound of his mother, Hannah, moving furniture echoed through the floorboards. To the world, Haruto was a medical impossibility. The doctors at Musada Fu General had called it a spontaneous remission, a 1 in a billion miracle. Haruto was technically quirkless. While the healing factor surging through his system after the reboot felt like a sudden awakening, clinical diagnostics proved otherwise. He lacked a quirk factor entirely. Fortunately, the doctors failed to notice his abnormal recovery during the exam. Had they caught his body knitting itself back together in real time, they never would have let him leave the hospital. It was something from outside the boundaries of this world's biology, an immortal engine of reconstruction. Every time a stray cancer cell tried to bloom, the healing factor destroyed it. It's like having a tiny, hyperactive construction crew in my body 24/7, Haruto muttered, catching the knife one last time and shoving it under his mattress as his door creaked open. Haruto? Honey, you're going to be late for your first day. Hannah leaned into the room. Her face showed lingering worry hidden behind her smile. She still looked at him like he might shatter if the wind blew too hard. Mom, relax, Haruto said, jumping to his feet with a surge of energy. I'm the picture of health. I'm basically a walking, talking vitamin commercial at this point. He grabbed his yellow backpack, pausing to look at her. He saw the way her eyes lingered on his chest, checking for the breathlessness that wasn't there anymore. The Deadpool side of him wanted to make a joke about tragic backstory insurance, but the 11-year-old Haruto, the part that loved her more than anything, just stepped forward and gave her a quick hug. Don't worry, he whispered, I've got the best plot armor money can't buy. Plus, I'm the narrator. We don't die in the first act. What was that, dear? I said I'm going to be the top of the class. Haruto shouted, already halfway down the stairs. Tell the neighbors the quirkless freak is back and he's feeling remarkably lively today. Haruto. Watch your language. He burst out the front door into the morning sun. All right, audience, he said, walking down the sidewalk and stepping over a crack in the pavement. First day of middle school. Let's see if the quirkless label still carries that lovely social stigma. I'm hoping for a fight. The school gates loomed ahead, a gateway to 3 years of adolescent posturing and inevitable property damage. Haruto navigated the sea of students. He found his assigned classroom and slid inside, ignoring the hushed whispers of students who recognized him as the kid who was supposed to be dead. He went to back of the room, claiming the throne of every protagonist in history, the desk in the back row, right next to the window. The classic window seat, Haruto whispered, leaning his chair back on 2 legs until it balanced on edge. He turned his head to the desk beside him. To any other student, it was a bizarre sight, a girl's school uniform, complete with a blazer and skirt, sitting perfectly upright in a chair with absolutely no body inside it. No head, no hands, just a floating outfit that seemed to be nervously organizing a pencil case. Toru Hagakure was sitting right there, doing her absolute best to be a ghost in a room full of people. Haruto didn't hesitate. He leaned over, resting his chin on his palm, and looked directly into the empty space just above the collar of her blazer. You know, you're the first person I've met who's actually winning at hide and seek, he said, a smirk on his face, but you really should check your left sleeve. It's a little wrinkled, and it's totally ruining your spectral entity vibe. Very unprofessional for a secret agent. The pencil on the desk clattered to the floor. The floating uniform jumped, the sleeves flying up in shock. Iat. You're talking to me, a high-pitched voice squeaked from the empty air. Wait a second, the voice said, and the sweetness was replaced by a tone of distrust. How did you do that? Haruto tilted his head, his smirk never wavering. Do what? Point out a wardrobe malfunction? You're welcome, by the way. Wrinkles are the silent killer of any good mysterious ghost aesthetic. No, the empty air hissed, nobody accidentally looks me in the eye. They talk to my hairband or to the air next to my ear. But you looked right at my eyes. You didn't even blink. The invisible girl was hovering in his personal space now, a phantom demanding a haunting. Do you have a vision quirk? Haruto let out a dry laugh that sounded far too weary. He looked past her for a split second, locking eyes with the audience over her invisible shoulder. You hear that? 1 minute I'm a good Samaritan, the next I'm a peeping Tom with sonar. The fans are going to love this character arc. He turned back to the space where her face should be. I don't have a vision quirk, Ghost-chan, he said. I'm quirkless. Ask the office. I'm the medical miracle kid who spent the last years staring at white ceilings. When you spend that much time in a quiet room, you learn to notice things. Then how? She demanded, the sleeves of her uniform trembling slightly. Because you're loud, Haruto lied, mostly. The mercenary memories in his head knew exactly how to track a target. I don't need to see you to know exactly where you're standing. Your breathing is a bit shallow, you're nervous. Your shoes are brand new, they squeak on the tile. And you move like you're trying to be a ghost, but you're too clumsy for a professional. He reached out, not to touch her, but to tap the air exactly where her forehead would be. Besides, he added with a wink, you're the only thing in this classroom that isn't a total cliché. Why wouldn't I notice the most interesting person in the room? The uniform slumped slightly, the defensive posture turned into a stunned stillness. The lunch bell hadn't even stopped ringing before Haruto was out of his seat. He wasn't interested in the social hierarchy of the cafeteria, he headed straight for the roof, the undisputed headquarters for protagonists. He was leaning against the chain-link fence, staring out at the Musutafu skyline and peeling the plastic off a convenience store yakisoba bun, when the heavy metal door flew open. A school uniform bounced out. It was a surreal sight, a blazer, a skirt, and a pair of white socks hopping in with absolutely no visible head or hands. Aha! I knew I smelled yakisoba, a bright, chirpy voice rang out from the empty air. You're Haruto, right? Haruto Akagi? From my class. I'm Toru Hagakure. I was totally going to say hi during homeroom, but the teacher was being all blah blah first day and I didn't want to get in trouble on morning one. She leaned over the railing next to him, the empty space above her collar bobbing as she looked at the view. Isn't it so pretty up here? I love first days. New pens, new shoes, and a whole bunch of new people to talk to. Honestly, it's kind of a bummer when you're invisible, everyone just assumes I'm a coat rack if I stay still for too long. But you're super interesting. Let's be friends. Haruto tilted his head, pointing a chopstick at the empty air where her face should be. Interesting? I'm the quirkless freak who spent most his time in a hospital bed, Toru-chan. Most people see me and think tragic backstory or fragile glass. Why would you want to be friends with a walking medical anomaly? Toru giggled, the sleeves of her blazer flying up to where her mouth would be. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to an excited whisper. So, come on. Tell me the secret. How did you know exactly where my eyes were? Is it a secret quirk? I promise I won't tell anyone, pinky swear. Haruto looked at the empty sleeve she held out, a crooked smirk crossing his face. No secret quirk, Ghost-chan. Just a very high resolution for reality. But if you want to be friends, I should warn you. He winked at the camera over his shoulder. I tend to attract a lot of plot-relevant trouble. You sure you're ready for the screen time? Trouble? Oh, I love trouble. Toru chirped, bouncing on her heels. It's way better than being ignored. So, are we officially friends now? Because I already decided we are. Chapter 3, High-tier software, low-spec hardware. The metal door to the roof slammed against the concrete wall. 3 second-year students swaggered out, their uniforms unbuttoned and their expressions twisted into that classic "we own the place" sneer. The one in the middle, a thick-necked kid with fingers that flickered with small, orange sparks, spat on the ground. Well, well. If it isn't the walking corpse, Sparky sneered, his eyes locking onto Haruto. I heard the hospital finally got tired of looking at your face and kicked you out. You should have stayed in the bed, Akagi. At least there, the nurses pretend to like you. The floating uniform beside Haruto stiffened. The sleeves of Toru's blazer dropped to her sides, the fabric trembling. Hey! That's super mean. Toru's voice squeaked, though she sounded more like she was scolding a naughty puppy than facing down bullies. He's just eating his lunch. Leave him alone. The bullies paused, their eyes darting to the floating clothes. Sparky laughed. Oh look, Invisible Freak is playing hero. What are you gonna do? Catch a cold at us? Go hide in a locker before we trip you. Haruto didn't move. He didn't even stop chewing. He slowly swallowed the last of his yakisoba bun, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked directly into the camera with a weary sigh. And here we go. The low-level thugs arrive to establish the protagonist's combat viability. Honestly, it's a bit boring. Could we at least get some dramatic background music? A little heavy metal, maybe. He turned his gaze toward Sparky, his eyes suddenly losing their childhood warmth and turning cold, the look of a man who had ended lives in another world. You've got a 3-second window, Haruto said, his voice dropping an octave. 1. Apologize to the lady for being a cliché. 2. Leave the roof. 3. I don't have a 3. I just really want to see if my new knuckles work as well they used to. You quirkless piece of... Sparky lunged, his hand igniting as he aimed right for Haruto's chest. Haruto didn't flinch. To his reboot-enhanced brain, Sparky was moving in slow motion, his form telegraphing every amateurish mistake. Haruto stepped inside, with efficiency. He grabbed Sparky's wrist, redirected the momentum with a smooth twist, and drove his palm into the bully's solar plexus. Oof! Sparky hit the concrete like a sack of wet flour, clutching his stomach and gasping for air. System check, physical strength is currently at middle school nightmare levels. Speed is satisfactory for now, Haruto narrated to the void as the other two bullies froze in terror. Sparky was still gasping on the concrete, clutching his stomach, but his two lackeys were finally shaking off their initial shock. The one with the buzzed hair raised a fist that glowed with green light, while the third lunged forward with fingers elongated into wooden talons. You're dead, Akagi, the buzzed one roared. Haruto didn't even drop his casual stance. He just let out a sharp exhale. 3 seconds. That's the budget for this scene. Any longer and we're just padding for time. Second 1. As the glowing fist swung toward his jaw, Haruto stepped into the attacker's dead zone. He caught the bully's extended arm, used his momentum against him, and delivered a brutal elbow strike to the bridge of his nose. Second 2. Without pausing, Haruto pivoted on his heel, ducking under the wooden talons of the third boy. He reached out, grabbed the kid's collar, and slammed his forehead into the bully's chin with a sickening clack of teeth. Second 3. Haruto then grabbed both boys by their belts and heaved. He tossed them directly onto the still groaning Sparky. The result was a pathetic pile of second years, stacked like wood in the center of the rooftop. He walked over to her. So, still want to be friends with the guy who just turned the school bullies into a human pile? Or is this where you run away and tell the teacher I'm a scary quirkless monster? Haruto stood over the groaning pile of bullies, his chest heaving. To anyone else, he looked like a top-tier combatant who had just effortlessly cleared a room. But to Haruto, the man who had lived through 1,000 life-or-death skirmishes, the feedback from his own nervous system was screaming a different story. His vision blurred for a split second, with a sharp ringing in his ears. Wait, he thought, his smirk faltering as he looked down at his trembling right hand. System check. Something's desensed. He tried to ball his fist again, but his fingers felt like they were made of lead. The reboot had given him the reflexes and the technical knowledge of a master mercenary, but it was currently housed in the frame of a sick 11-year-old boy. The mind was a Ferrari engine, the body was a rusted-out go-kart. The elbow strike he'd delivered to the first bully had cracked the kid's nose, sure, but Haruto could feel the dull, throbbing ache in his own joint where the impact had rattled his brittle bones. His lungs, though healed, felt tight, struggling to keep up with the explosive output his brain had just demanded. "Oh, that's just great," Haruto muttered, his voice cracking slightly with exhaustion. "The software is running at 120 FPS, but the hardware is overheating on the loading screen. If that fight had lasted 10 more seconds, my heart would have probably staged a formal protest and left the building." "Haruto? Are you okay?" Toru's uniform drifted closer, the sleeves reaching out tentatively. "You're shaking. Is it your heart? Should I call a teacher?" "No," Haruto snapped. He leaned heavily against the chain-link fence, the metal rattling under his weight. The healing factor was working, he could feel the construction crew in his chest frantically repairing the micro-tears in his muscles, but it couldn't magically grant him the physical conditioning he'd missed while hooked up to N4. Note to self, the invincible mercenary gimmick has a very short battery life, he thought, his eyes narrowing. "I'm a glass cannon. One good hit from a real quirk, not these middle school chumps, and I'll shatter into a million pieces." The plot armor is currently held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. He turned to Toru, forcing a weak grin. "I'm fine, Ghost-chan. Just a bit of post-game lag. Turns out, jumping straight from a hospital bed into a 3-on-1 brawl is a great way to remind yourself that you're basically made of twigs and optimism right now. I need a gym," he thought, "and a lot of protein. If I'm going to survive the first major arc, I need this body to stop acting like it's made of wet tissue paper." School ended. He was now walking back home, besides him a floating school uniform. The socks hit the pavement with a cheerful click-clack and the empty sleeves of the blazer swung back and forth. "That was so cool, Haruto. Seriously. The way you went whoosh and then bam." Toru chirped. "And then you just stacked them. Like cordwood. I didn't even know you could stack people. Is that a martial art? Is it called people stacking?" Haruto was walking considerably slower than he had that morning. Every joint in his body felt like it had been replaced with rusted hinges. Note to the developers, the cool finisher move has a massive stamina debuff, Haruto thought, wiping a thin trail of sweat from his temple. "I'm currently running on 2% battery. If a stray cat tries to mug us right now, I'm just going to lie down and accept my fate." He looked over at the floating clothes. "And look at my CO star. She's got infinite MP and hasn't stopped talking since the rooftop. I think I accidentally recruited the energetic sidekick type. My ears might give out before my legs do. Are you even listening?" Toru bounced in front of him, walking backward with grace that made Haruto's weak knees jealous. "I was thinking, since we're like a team now, we should probably have a secret base. Or at least a favorite crepe stand. Oh. There's a place near the station that has strawberry whipped cream and—" "Toru-chan," Haruto interrupted, his voice raspy. He stopped walking and leaned his weight against a light pole, his chest heaving. The uniform stopped mid-skip. The sleeves dropped, the blazer tilting in a gesture of concern. "Haruto? You're doing the shaking thing again. Is it the medical stuff?" "It's just physical therapy stuff," Haruto wheezed. He leaned his head back against the cold wood of the pole, closing his eyes for a second to let his vision clear. I can't exactly tell her I've been rebooted by a cosmic system and have the combat data of a veteran mercenary stored in a body that's mostly hospital jello. He forced his breathing to steady, then pushed off the pole. He needed to change the subject before she started asking about his heart rate or calling an ambulance. Anyway, he said, nodding toward the convenience store on the corner. Enough about my tragic backstory stats. Since you've officially appointed yourself my sidekick, you should probably know that a protagonist's energy is fueled by high-quality snacks. Does that place still have those limited edition melon pans, or did the NPCs buy them all out already? Toru's uniform bounced, her concern instantly evaporating into pure excitement. Oh! The ones with the strawberry filling. They're totally still there. But you have to get there before 4 or the sports clubs swoop in like a pack of hungry wolves. She skipped ahead of him, her white socks flashing against the pavement. If we hurry, I can snag 2 while you're still walking at grandpa speed. But you're paying. Fine, fine, he called out, picking up his pace just a fraction. But if they're sold out, you're the one who has to explain to my stomach why we're failing our first mission. Mission accepted. Toru cheered, throwing an invisible peace sign into the air. Chapter 4, Off-Screen Grinding. The sun was beginning to dip as Haruto finally reached his front door. He paused. I'm currently held together by 2 strawberry melon pans, he thought. When is the near-infinite stamina that comes with big age kick in? He straightened his posture, slapped his cheeks to bring some color back into his face, and turned the handle. I'm home, he called out, injecting as much healthy protagonist energy into his voice as he could muster. The miracle child has returned from the battlefield of middle school, and he requires a high-calorie tribute. The sound of a vacuum cleaner cut off instantly. Hannah appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes did the thing they always did lately, a scan from his head to his toes, looking for a limp, a pale complexion, or a cough. Haruto. You're late, she said, though her voice was more relieved than angry. I was just about to call the school. Did you have to stay late for a checkup? Are you feeling okay? Mom, I'm fine, Haruto said, sliding into his house slippers. He walked past her into the kitchen, his instincts noting the smell of ginger and soy sauce. I just made a friend. Or a sidekick. It's hard to tell yet, she has a very high words per minute count. Hannah followed him, her expression softening into a look of wonder. A friend? Oh, Haruto, that's wonderful. She sat down at the small kitchen table, watching him as he grabbed a glass of water. What's their name? Are they in your class? Do they want to come over for dinner sometime? I can make extra katsudon. Haruto took a long, steadying drink, feeling the construction crew in his chest cheer for the hydration. He leaned against the counter, looking at his mother. In his old life he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him with that much uncomplicated hope. It was a little terrifying. Her name is Toru. And let's hold off on the katsudon for now, he said with a crooked grin. She's a bit hard to see. Literally. She's invisible. Hannah blinked. Invisible? Like a quirk. The best kind, Haruto said. She's basically a walking copyright lawsuit for a certain Fantastic Four member, but she's good people. She kept me entertained while I was navigating my social hurdles. Hannah's smile faltered just a fraction, her fingers tracing a pattern on the tabletop. And the other kids? Were they kind? Haruto caught the subtle shift in her tone. She was asking if they'd called him quirkless. If they'd treated him like a dying boy. He thought about the pile of bullies on the roof. He thought about the way his knuckles still throbbed from the impact of Sparky's jaw. They were exactly what I expected, Haruto said, his voice dropping the perky kid act for a second. But don't worry about me, Mom. I'm not the same kid who went into that hospital. I've got a very aggressive insurance policy now. Nobody's going to mess with the Akagi brand. Hana looked at him, her brow furrowing. You sound so different sometimes, Haruto. It's the hospital food, Haruto joked, quickly pivoting back to his meta-persona to break the tension. All those mystery meat patties and lukewarm broth. They're basically a super soldier serum if you eat enough of them. He walked over and gave her a quick, one-armed squeeze. Now, what's for dinner? I need enough protein to feed a small army. Hana laughed, and reached up to pat his cheek. Ginger beef and extra rice. Go wash up. As Haruto headed toward the stairs, his legs feeling like they were made of lead weights. Scene end. Emotional beat achieved. Now, if I can just make it to my bed before my hardware actually crashes, I'll call this a successful pilot episode. When he finally pushed into his room, he let his backpack hit the floor with a heavy thud, and went directly to his bed. He turned his head slightly, looking toward the camera in the corner of the ceiling with a weary, sharp-toothed grin. All right, folks, he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The flashy intro is over. We've established the powers, met the invisible love interest, or sidekick, let's not get ahead of ourselves, and successfully beat up some NPCs. But as every fan knows, you can't survive the finale on vibes alone. It's time for the behind-the-scenes training arc. Cut the lights, cue the montage music. If I'm going to be the main character of this disaster, I at least need to be able to throw a punch without needing a nap afterward. 3 years later. The calendar on the wall had most of its dates crossed out in aggressive, red ink. 3 years. 1,095 days of hardware upgrades, protein shakes, and breaking the law for all the right reasons. Haruto stood in front of his bedroom mirror, pulling on a sleek, charcoal grey tracksuit with crimson accents. He looked at his reflection, and while he wasn't a hulking bodybuilder, the frail, sickly frame of an 11-year-old was long gone. In its place was something lean and coiled. System update, hardware version 2.0, Haruto whispered. Stamina issues? Recalibrated. Bone density? Stabilized. Power level? Let's just call it variable. He reached under his bed and pulled out a battered metal case. Inside lay the vigilante kit, the scuffed goggles, the reinforced lower face mask, and the heavy fabric that had become a nightmare for Musuda Fu's low-level street villains. The fans love a good vigilante subplot, he muttered to the empty room. Steal from the scum, pay off the mother's medical debt, and disappear like a shadow. It's a classic Robin Hood trope with a dash of Punisher. Mom thinks the hospital had a billing error. Let's keep it that way. He didn't pack the hoodie today. That would be a one-way ticket to a police interrogation. Haruto. You're going to be late for the train. Hana's voice drifted up the stairs. She sounded younger these days, lighter. The crushing weight of the debt he'd secretly vanished had taken 10 years off her face. Coming, Mom. He bounded down the stairs, skipping the last 3 steps and landing with the grace of someone who had spent 3 years jumping off rooftops. He grabbed a piece of toast from the table in mid-air. Hana stood by the door, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at him in his athletic gear. Yue, Haruto. The hero course. Are you sure? You've already had enough miracles for one lifetime. Haruto stopped, his hand on the door handle. He looked at her, and for a second, the mercenary and the meta-fan faded, leaving only the sun. I'm not proving anything, Mom, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I'm just taking my rightful place in the opening credits. Besides, someone has to show those elite quirks that a quirkless kid with a high-budget training montage is the most dangerous thing in the room. He gave her a quick, confident grin and stepped out into the morning air. The train ride was a blur of internal calculations. How much force would it take to disable a zero-pointer? How many points did he need to secure a main cast slot? All right, audience, the prologue is officially over, he whispered. 3 years of moonlighting as a vigilante has sharpened the blade. I don't know exactly where my limit is yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Expectation, giant robots. Reality, probably a lot of property damage and a very confused Eraserhead. As the train pulled into the station near Uehai, he saw a familiar head of, well, a familiar floating tracksuit. Haruto. Toru Hagakure didn't so much walk as she did vibrate with excitement. Her own athletic gear was bright teal, the sleeves waving frantically. You're actually doing it. We're both doing it. Can you believe it? UA. The big leagues. Are you nervous? I'm so nervous I think I'm accidentally becoming even more invisible. Haruto adjusted the straps of his backpack, his smirk returning in full force. Nervous? Ghost-chan, I've spent 3 years preparing for this boss fight. I'm just worried the robots aren't going to provide enough XP to make the trip worth it. He looked up at the massive glass gates of Uehai, the sun reflecting off the U&A like a spotlight. Roll the intro music, he whispered to the void. It's time to break the game. Chapter 5, Spot the Protagonist. The glass towers of Uehai loomed like a final boss arena, shimmering under the morning sun. Haruto adjusted the sleeves of his charcoal grey tracksuit. Entry point reached, he murmured to the invisible audience. Now, let's see if I can spot the main character in this sea of NPCs. Usually, they're the ones with the most impractical hair or the look of someone having a midlife crisis at age 14. He didn't have to look far. Just a few meters ahead, a green-haired boy in a plain middle school uniform was vibrating so hard he looked like he might actually phase through the pavement. Whoa! The boy tripped over his own feet, gravity doing its classic protagonist introduction move. Haruto moved before the kid could even realize he was falling, but he wasn't the only one. A girl with a bob cut and a friendly face reached out just as Haruto caught the boy by his backpack strap. Careful there, Broccoli-kun, Haruto said, as he stabilized the boy. The pavement isn't a fan of face plants. Terrible for the complexion. Oh, good save, the girl chirped, her fingers held up, as she smiled at them. It would be a bad omen to fall right before the start, wouldn't it? The boy froze, his eyes wide as dinner plates, looking back and forth between Haruto and the girl. He scrambled to find his footing, bowing so low he nearly hit the ground again. I am so sorry. Thank you. I was thinking about the practical portion and the scoring system. And he stopped, blinking up at Haruto. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Thank you for saving me from, well, the floor. Haruto leaned back, hands in his tracksuit pockets. Nice to meet you, I'm Haruto Akagi. And I'm Okako Uraraka, the girl added, her eyes crinkling. Are you too nervous? My heart is practically trying to beat its way out of my chest. Haruto flashed a crooked smirk. See this? Haruto whispered to the void over Izuku's shoulder. The stuttering, the freckles. This is a level 1 hero if I've ever seen one. And then we have Pinky over here, providing the much-needed emotional support for the opening act. Meanwhile, I'm over here with a 3-year head start and a criminal record I've successfully scrubbed. Izuku blinked, looking at the empty air Haruto was talking to. Akagi-san? Are you okay? You seem to be talking to a ghost. Hey! I'm right here. Toru's teal tracksuit sleeves flapped as she bounced over. I'm the only ghost around here. Honestly, Haruto, stop being weird. You're going to scare the poor guy. Izuku let out a tiny squeak as he realized a tracksuit was floating beside him. Okako tilted her head, looking fascinated. Wow! An invisibility quirk? That's so cool. Save the analysis for the written exam, Broccoli-kun, Haruto interrupted, patting Izuku on the shoulder. And don't worry, Moonface, I'm sure you'll float right through the results. Take a breath. The robots are just scrap metal waiting to happen. You there? Stop loitering! A sharp, robotic voice cut through the air. A tall boy with glasses and engines in his calves marched toward them. This is a place of prestige. If you are here to play and give out ridiculous nicknames, you are mocking the UA legacy. Haruto didn't even blink. He looked the tall boy up and down, then turned back to the camera with a weary sigh. Relax, Turbo Nerd, Haruto said. We're just building team morale. It's a very high-tier strategy. You should try it. T-Turbo. Nerd, the boy sputtered. I am Tenya Ida. And calling someone by absurd labels is highly disrespectful. Haruto turned toward the massive doors of the auditorium, his gait smooth and predatory. The whole world is disrespectful, Four Eyes. Get used to it. Present Mike is waiting to scream at us, and I've got a date with a bunch of three-pointers. The auditorium was a sea of nervous teenagers, but the stage belonged to a single man with hair that defied the laws of both physics and taste. Welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say hey. Haruto leaned back in his theater seat, arms crossed behind his head, balancing his chair on its two back legs. To his left, Broccoli-kun was vibrating so fast he was practically humming. To his right, Turbonerd was sitting so rigidly he looked like a statue carved out of stress. Akagi-san. Ida hissed, his hand chopping the air at a perfect 90-degree angle. Please. Your constant whispering is a distraction to those of us trying to memorize the layout of the urban sectors. And stop talking to the air. Relax, Sonic, Haruto said, not even looking at him. I'm just providing the DVD commentary. It's for the fans. Sonic. My name is... Quiet, engine legs, Haruto interrupted, pointing toward the stage. The yellow hair is explaining the loot drops. Present Mike was currently gesturing to a screen showing the various robot types, the one-pointer, the two-pointer, and the three-pointer. Standard RPG progression, Haruto narrated to the void. Trash mobs, mid-tier threats, and the heavy hitters. And somewhere in the code, there's a zero-pointer, the classic hazard that people think is a wall but is actually just a morality test for the protagonist. Boring. Izuku, meanwhile, was frantically scribbling in a notebook. The mock battle, it's a simulated urban area, but they haven't mentioned the fourth type of robot on the handout. Don't sweat the small stuff, Greenie, Haruto said, leaning over. Just hit things until they stop moving. It's the universal language of shonen. Suddenly, Ida stood up, his finger pointing straight at the stage. I have a question. On the handout, there are 4 types of villains. Such an omission would be a matter of great shame for an institution like UA. He then pointed directly at Izuku. And you? You've been muttering this whole time. If you aren't here to take this seriously, then leave. He then shifted his glare to Haruto. And you, Akagi-san? Your informal nicknames and constant whispering are a stain on this institution. Haruto slowly let his chair thud back onto all 4 legs. He turned his head, his eyes turning cold and sharp, the murk briefly overriding the meta fan. Listen, Turbo Nerd, Haruto said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous tone. I've spent 3 years fighting things that didn't have a power-off switch. I take this more seriously than your iron socks ever could. Sit down before you trip over your own ego. You're blocking the screen. Ida froze, his mouth hanging open. He sat back down slowly, his stiff movements suddenly feeling very small. And that's the tension beat, Haruto thought. Now, let's get to the part where I turn these tin cans into a pile of scrap metal. Chapter 6, Speedrunning. While the other examinees were busy puffing out their chests, Haruto was recalibrating. He leaned forward, his center of gravity shifting. Hiss. The sound was microscopic, the release of air from the gate's locking mechanism, but to Haruto, it was a starting pistol. Before the gates had even cleared 6 inches of ground, Haruto was gone. He slid under the rising metal, rolled, and vanished into the foe city before the first weight could leave a competitor's mouth. The starting gun has fired. Or it would have, if that crazy kid had waited for it. Present Mick's voice boomed over the speakers. There are no countdowns in real battles. He's already at 2 points. Run! 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 A one-pointer rolled around the corner, its red eye sensor scanning. Haruto didn't punch it, that was a waste of calories. Instead, he vaulted over its head, and as he passed, he jammed a high-tensile screwdriver, pulled from his tracksuit pocket, directly into the neck joint's wiring harness. Zaps spark. 1 point, Haruto narrated, already mid-air as he spotted a 2-pointer. Double tap for security, Haruto muttered, flicking a small, weighted ball bearing into the 2-pointer's optical sensor before his feet even hit the pavement. The robot shrieked, its targeting computer spiraling into a logic loop as it began spinning aimlessly. He didn't wait to watch it fall, he was already moving ahead. Points, 3 pace, optimal. Audience engagement, probably confused as hell, he whispered to the empty air as he reached the rooftop. He spotted a cluster of 3 one-pointers moving in a pincer maneuver toward a panicked examinee. Haruto didn't jump down. Instead, he pulled a spool of high-tension wire from his belt, looped it around a rooftop vent, and dropped like a spider. He swung through the center of the trio, his boots, reinforced with steel toes, connecting with the first robot's head with a sickening crunch. As the momentum carried him past, he lashed the wire around the second one's neck and kicked off the third's chest. Clang! Snap! Spark! In 3 seconds, 3 robots were a heap of tangled limbs and short-circuiting motherboards. Points, 6 total, 15. I'm speedrunning this, Haruto said, at this rate, I'll hit the safe zone before the 10-minute mark. The buzzer for the final 3 minutes let out a mournful wail, and that's when the ground decided to stop being solid. A shadow the size of a cathedral swept over the urban center. The 0-pointer smashed through a block of faux apartments, sending a tidal wave of dust and debris into the air. Target identified, the 0-pointer, Haruto whispered, leaning against a lamppost as the other examinees began the massive retreat trope. He looked toward the base of the mechanical titan and saw her, the girl with the bob cut, pinned under a slab of concrete. The treads were grinding closer, a slow-motion execution. Haruto's hand went to a specialized thermite charge at his hip. The mercenary in his head was already calculating the climb, 3 seconds to the knee, 6 to the main processor. He could kill it. But then, he saw the green hair. Midoriya was standing there, shaking so hard he looked like he was vibrating out of existence. But his eyes were locked on the girl. Haruto's hand drifted away from the charge. He let out a low, dry chuckle and settled back into a spectator's stance, looking directly into the camera with a knowing smirk. And here comes the golden boy moment, Haruto narrated. The protagonist finds his spark in the face of certain death. If I step in now, I'm just stealing the origin story from a kid who needs it to survive the next 7 seasons. Crack boom. With a violent explosion of green lightning that shattered every window within 3 blocks, Midoriya launched himself skyward. The air itself seemed to scream as his fist connected with the 0-pointer's face, turning the mountain of metal into a falling star of scrap. Now that is what you call a high-budget climax. 10/10 for the animation team. As the buzzer signaled the end of the exam, Haruto turned his back on the wreckage and the broken Midoriya. He started walking toward the exit, hands deep in his pockets. Inside the darkened observation room, the wall of monitors flickered with 100 different battles, but one screen had stayed pinned to the center of the console for the last 10 minutes. Who is this kid? Present Mike asked, leaning forward so far his tall hair nearly brushed the glass. Battle Center B, examinee number 2234. He didn't wait for the countdown, he hasn't used a single flashy move, and I'm pretty sure he just disabled a 3-pointer with a, is that a household tool? Eraserhead leaned back in the shadows, his eyes bloodshot and narrowed as he watched Haruto scale a building with high efficiency. "He's not using a quirk," Aizawa muttered, his voice gravelly. "Look at his center of gravity. He's moving like someone who has spent years in live fire zones." "It's certainly unorthodox," Midnight added, tapping her chin as she watched Haruto swing on a high-tension wire to stack 3 one-pointers like cordwood. "Most of these kids are trying to show us how big their explosions are. This one is showing us how little effort he needs to expend to achieve the same result. It's almost insulting to the budget we spent on those machines." "He's a cheater," a voice boomed from the corner. Vlad King gestured wildly at the screen. "He's using tools. High-tension wire? Screwdrivers? That should be restricted to the support course. He's bypassing the spirit of the exam." "Is he?" Principal Nizu sipped his tea, the steam fogging his small glasses. He didn't look annoyed, he looked delighted. "The rules state defeat the villains. They do not state how. If a student uses a piece of rebar from the rubble, we call it resourcefulness. If this boy brings his own rebar in a more compact form, is that not just superior preparation?" The screen suddenly whited out as Midoriya's massive shockwave leveled the zero-pointer. When the dust settled, the camera panned to Haruto, who was simply leaning against a lamp post, watching the hero moment with a bored smirk. "He didn't move to help," All Might whispered, his voice heavy with a mix of confusion and observation. "He saw the girl trapped. He reached for something on his belt, and then he stopped. He let young Midoriya take the blow." "Calculated," Aizawa said, a small spark of interest in his eyes. He realized he didn't need the points, and he realized someone else was going to handle the risk. "He's efficient. And according to his medical records, he's quirkless." The room went deathly silent. "Quirkless?" Present Mike barked. "You're telling me a kid with no power just hit the top 10 of the leaderboard using nothing but a tracksuit and a bad attitude?" Nizu's tail flicked with interest. "It appears we have an unprecedented anomaly in our applicant pool, gentlemen. I suggest we keep his file open. I am curious to see how a student like him will adapt at UA." Chapter 7, First Day. The Akagi household was silent, save for the anxious tapping of Hana's foot against the floor. On the kitchen table sat the thick, official envelope from UA High. It looked heavy and expensive. Haruto sat across from it, leaning back with his hands behind his head. To his mom, he looked like a statue of calm. To the audience in his head, he was simply checking the clock for the precise moment the plot was scheduled to advance. "Haruto, just open it," Hana whispered. "Whatever it says, I'm proud of you. I want to know." "Relax, Mom. The narrative pacing suggests a positive outcome," Haruto said, finally reaching for the letter. "Besides, I did the math. My points per minute ratio was top tier, even without the heroic sacrifice bonus." He ripped the seal, and a small metal disc clattered onto the table. A holographic projection flickered to life, casting a blue glow over the kitchen. But instead of the booming, muscle-bound face of All Might that most students were seeing, the image was of a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the dawn of the quirk era. Shota Aizawa stared out of the hologram with bloodshot eyes, a massive yellow sleeping bag draped over his shoulder like a discarded cocoon. "Haruto Akagi," the man rasped, sounding equal parts bored and suspicious. "I'm Shota Aizawa. I'll be your homeroom teacher." Usually, the school sends a flashier greeting with more shouting. But the principal decided I should be the one to talk to you directly. Hana gasped, clutching her chest. Haruto just raised an eyebrow, noting the teacher's exhausted logic-type energy. "You scored 42 villain points," Aizawa continued, leaning closer to the lens. "Which is unprecedented for someone using a screwdriver and high-tension wire. You were efficient, you didn't waste movement, and you didn't seek out glory. You also have 0 rescue points. You watched a fellow student risk their life and chose to stay back. Some call that pragmatism. I call it a calculated risk. Aizawa let out a heavy, soul-weary sigh. The board spent hours debating whether your tools constituted a violation. In the end, the principal decided that if the villains are disabled, the method is irrelevant. You passed the written and the practical. Welcome to Class 1A. Don't make me regret this. The hologram flickered out, leaving the kitchen in sudden darkness. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before Hana let out a sob of pure joy and tackled Haruto into a hug that nearly bypassed his Hardware 2.0 durability. System update, tutorial complete, Haruto thought, his face pressed into his mother's apron as he thought. Next saga starts tomorrow. Expectation, a quiet first day. Reality, Aizawa is going to try to expel me within the first hour for not being plus ultra enough. It's going to be a 5-star episode. The morning air was crisp, the kind of weather that usually signaled a high-budget opening credits sequence. Haruto adjusted the strap of his yellow backpack, feeling the familiar weight of his utility kit tucked hidden beneath his notebooks. He was busy mentally tagging the NPCs passing him on the sidewalk when a familiar vibration entered his sensory radius. Haruto. Haruto, look. The tie. I actually tied the tie. A UA girl's blazer and skirt came barreling around the corner, weaving through a group of salarymen like a heat-seeking missile. Toru Hagakure wasn't just walking, she was radiating a level of hype that threatened to break the frame. Haruto stopped, his hands in his pockets, and watched the floating uniform skidding to a halt in front of him. Ghost-chan, Haruto said, his smirk playing on his lips as he looked exactly where her frantic, invisible eyes were. I see you've mastered the formal attire DLC. Though, technically, your tie is about 3 degrees off-center. It's ruining the symmetry of the shot. Oh, hush. I had to watch 3 YouTube tutorials and I think I still accidentally choked myself twice. The sleeves of her blazer flew up, gesturing wildly toward the massive gates in the distance. Can you believe it? We're actually going. We're UA students. I saw the mail truck yesterday and I literally did a backflip. I think I scared the mailman because, you know, floating pajamas doing gymnastics, but who cares? We're in Class 1A. Haruto started walking again, with the invisible girl bouncing along beside him like a glitchy sidekick. Class 1A, Haruto repeated, his voice dropping into that low, narrating tone. The elite tier. We're officially sharing a room with the human equivalent of a walking explosion and a kid who's basically a half-and-half freezer-burned steak. It's going to be a nightmare for the power scaling. You're doing the weird talk again. Toru giggled, her empty sleeve looping through his arm in a familiar, grounding gesture. But seriously, Haruto, you're the only person I know who got in without a quirk. Everyone at the exam was talking about the ghost of Center B who was dismantling robots with a toolbox. I prefer the term system optimizer, Ghost-chan. But don't worry. Today's the first day. We've got a homeroom teacher who looks like he lives on a diet of caffeine and spite. I give it 10 minutes before he tries to logic us into an early retirement. Ah, don't be such a pessimist. It's going to be great. New friends, new hero costumes. Oh. My costume is going to be so cool, Haruto. You won't even be able to see it. That's, literally the point of your existence, Toru, Haruto muttered, though his eyes were fixed on the towering UA gates ahead. Let's see if these heroes are ready for a player who doesn't follow the manual. The massive door to Class 1A loomed ahead, designed for students with growth quirks or just a very inflated sense of importance. Haruto stood before it, his hands deep in his pockets, while Toru vibrated with enough kinetic energy to power a small city beside him. It's huge. Toru squeaked, her sleeves reaching up to trace the frame. Do you think there's a giant in our class? Oh, Haruto, what if it's a literal giant? I'll have to be so careful not to get stepped on. Relax, Ghost-chan, Haruto muttered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the wood grain. It's just aesthetic intimidation. The school spent half the budget on oversized carpentry just to make us feel small before the first bell. It's a classic psychological debuff. He reached out and slid the door open with a slow, deliberate click. The room was already a hive of main character energy. In the second row, Turbo Nerd, Ida, was mid-chop, as he lectured a boy who was currently using a desk as a footrest. "Remove your feet from that desk immediately!" Ida roared, his glasses catching the light. "It is an insult to the upperclassmen who studied here and the craftsmen who carved it." The boy with the spiky, ash-blonde hair didn't even flinch. He just leaned back, a jagged, predatory smirk on his face. "Like I give a damn, Four Eyes. Which middle school did you crawl out of, anyway? Some place for losers. I am from some private academy." Ida shouted, clutching his chest. Haruto stepped into the room, his mercenary brain already tagging the threats. Target A, the human claymore, Bakugo. High explosive yield, 0 social battery. Avoid direct eye contact unless you want a face full of nitroglycerin. Target B, the engine-legged bureaucrat, Ida. High speed, low flexibility. Great for a distraction, terrible at parties. Target C, the broccoli-kun, Midoriya. Currently standing by the door, looking like he's about to have a nervous breakdown. And here we go, Haruto thought. The aggressive rival and the rule follower are already engaged in their scripted conflict. It's like watching a cutscene you can't skip. Ida's head snapped toward the door. He marched toward Haruto and Midoriya with the intensity of a runaway train. He stopped mid-sentence as Haruto stepped into his personal space. Haruto didn't look aggressive, he just looked incredibly bored, like a man who had already seen this episode 3 times and was waiting for the commercial break. All right, Turbo Nerd. Take a breath, Haruto said, his voice dropping into a casual, almost helpful drone. He reached out and lightly tapped Ida's rigid shoulder. "If you keep your blood pressure this high, your engine is going to stall before we even get to homeroom. It's bad for the long-term character development." Ida blinked, his arm freezing mid-air. "Character development? My blood pressure is within optimal." "I'm sure it is," Haruto interrupted, flashing a quick, crooked grin that lacked his usual predatory edge. "Look, thanks for the apology. It's a very lawful good move. I appreciate the hustle. But let's save the 90-degree bows for someone who actually cares about the rules, okay? You're blocking the traffic flow." As he reached his desk, he felt the heat of Bakugo's glare. The explosive blonde was leaning back, his red eyes narrowed into slits. You're that quirkless extra who was messing with the robots in Center B. The screwdriver freak." The room went quiet. 20 pairs of eyes including a boy with half-white, half-red hair who hadn't looked up until now landed on Haruto. Haruto didn't look away. He walked toward his desk, passing Bakugo's seat with a casual, dismissive shrug. System status, identified, Haruto thought the alpha dog feels threatened by the guy with the toolbox. It's adorable, really. Like a chihuahua barking at a tactical nuke. He sat down, leaning his chair back on 2 legs. "Careful, Sparky," Haruto said aloud, "keep scowling like that and the animators are going to give you permanent forehead wrinkles. It's bad for your marketability." "What did you say, you deku?" Bakugo roared, palms beginning to pop with orange sparks. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack your bags and leave." A cold, flat voice cut through the tension. On the floor by the doorway, a yellow sleeping bag lay like a giant banana. A man with tangled black hair and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep since the Quirk era crawled out of it. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down," Shota Izawa rasped, standing up and shedding the sleeping bag. "Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough." Haruto grinned, a sharp, knowing look. Right on cue, the stereotypical shounen sensei makes his appearance. Chapter 8, The Glitch in the Hero Course. Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a stack of blue and white gym uniforms, tossing them onto the podium with a dull thud. "Put these on and head out to the PE grounds," he commanded, his voice devoid of any first-day enthusiasm. "We're doing a quirk apprehension test." The class erupted in a wave of confused murmurs. "A quirk test? But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation?" Eureka asked, her voice brimming with the nervous energy of a student who actually followed the handbook. Aizawa turned his head, his gaze flat. "If you're going to become heroes, you don't have time for such leisurely events. UA's selling point is its freedom on campus. Which also means my freedom to run my class however I see fit." He paused, a dark, predatory glint flickering in his bloodshot eyes. It was the look of a man about to pull the rug out from under a group of unsuspecting toddlers. The student who ranks last across all 8 events will be judged as having no potential. Aizawa let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating, before dropping the hammer. "And will be summarily expelled." The air in the room didn't just turn cold, it vanished. Ida's hand chopping froze mid-air. Midoriya looked like he was about to physically dissolve into a puddle of anxiety. Even Bakugo's sparks died down, replaced by a sharp, focused tension. Haruto leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning Aizawa's face. There it is, Haruto thought. The rational deception gambit. High stakes, high pressure, designed to force a limit break in the first act. Aizawa's eyes drifted toward Haruto, lingering for a fraction of a second too long. Natural disasters, big accidents, and selfish villains, Aizawa continued, his scarf beginning to drift upward as if possessed. Calamities that can happen at any time or place. Japan is covered in unfairness. It's a hero's job to combat that unfairness. If you want to play at being friends, go to a vocational school. This is UA. He jerked a thumb toward the door. The demonstration is over. Prove you belong here. Last place goes home. The locker room was a cacophony of adolescent posturing and the sharp scent of aerosol deodorant. Most of the boys were busy marveling at the UA gym uniforms, but Haruto was already half-changed, his movements swift. As he pulled the navy blue tracksuit over his head, a shadow loomed over his bench. Bakugo stood there, his jaw set in a hard, aggressive line, staring at the lean, corded muscle of Haruto's back. "Oi, screwdriver," Bakugo growled, his voice low enough that only Haruto could hear. "I don't know what kind of stunt you pulled at the entrance exam, but don't think for a second you belong here. You're just a quirkless bug waiting to get stepped on by a real hero." Haruto didn't turn around. He just finished zipping his jacket, the metallic shhhk of the zipper punctuating the silence. He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the camera in the corner of the locker room. The aggressive rival is stuck in his pre-programmed dialogue. He can't process a human existing without a quirk. He finally turned to face Bakugo, a small, weary smile on his face. "You know, Sparky, you're really dedicated to the bit. I respect the commitment. But if you spend all your energy barking at bugs, you're going to miss the actual boss fights. It's a rookie mistake. I'll kill you." Bakugo's palms let out a warning pop, the smell of nitroglycerin filling the air. "Probably," Haruto said, stepping past him with a casual pat on the shoulder. "But that would be a massive hit to your reputation, wouldn't it? Top student expelled on day 1 for murdering a quirkless extra. Think of the PR nightmare." He walked toward the exit, passing a trembling Midoriya who was struggling with his shoelaces. "Chin up, Broccoli-kun," Haruto muttered. "Try not to let your hardware crash before the first event. Last trial, ball throw." After bypassing the initial trials with a series of high-efficiency, using compressed air to match the speedsters and calculated leverage to outclench the heavy hitters add to that his superhuman strength, Haruto finally stood in the center of the throwing circle. Now came the ball throw trial, which was the climax of the physical performance patch. The air around the training field was still heavy, shattered expectations. Eureka had just broken the physics engine with an infinity score, and Midoriya had followed up by nearly taking his own finger off to clock a staggering 705.3 meters. Haruto Akagi. You're up. The class went silent. Compared to the literal gravity-defying and bone-breaking spectacles, the quirkless kid felt like a transition scene. Haruto stepped into the circle, rolling his shoulder. The human arm is a whip, he thought. And a whip is just a series of levers designed to break the sound barrier. He pivoted his entire kinetic chain, starting from his lead foot and twisting his hips. At the apex of the arc, his fingers flicked. Whirr. The ball cut through the air with a stabilized spin, keeping its velocity far longer than a standard human throw. 82 meters, the device chirped. It wasn't a kilometer. It wasn't infinity. But it was a world-class Olympic record set by a high schooler with no power-up genes. Wait, Kaminari whispered, he just outthrew most of the quirk users with nothing. Aizawa didn't look at the screen. He stepped into the circle, his capture scarf twitching like a living snake. His eyes glowed a dull, menacing red, and his hair drifted upward, fueled by a surge of power that usually made students' blood run cold. Akagi, Aizawa rasped, his voice dropping into a dangerous frequency. I've been watching your tricks, the CO2 canisters in your shoes. He stepped closer, the red glow of his eyes intensifying. By the standards of this school, you're cheating. You're bypassing the physical strain we're trying to measure. Why shouldn't I expel you right now? Haruto didn't flinch. Even with his teacher's erasure active, he felt absolutely nothing, no loss of power, no sudden drain. He just wiped a smudge of dirt off his palm and looked directly into Aizawa's bloodshot eyes. Cheating is a matter of perspective, sensei, Haruto said, his voice calm and sharp as a razor. You told us to be rational. What's more rational than using every tool in the inventory to achieve the objective? He gestured to the ball still bouncing in the distance. I'm quirkless. My potential in your database is a 0. I'm just showing you that your UI is outdated. Aizawa stared at him, the red glow of his eyes slowly fading as the realization hit him, his quirk was doing absolutely nothing to the boy standing in front of him. There was no power to erase. He let out a long, weary sigh, the tension in his scarf relaxing. Logical, Aizawa muttered, turning back to the class and rubbing the bridge of his nose. But don't think your tools will save you when a villain decides to break them. There's no undo button in the field. Rankings are up. Look for yourselves. The class crowded around the digital terminal as the final standings flickered to life. 1 Momoye Iorozu. 2 Shoto Todoroki. 3 Katsuki Bakugo. 8 Haruto Akagi. 20 Izuku Midoriya. Haruto leaned against a nearby equipment shed, hands back in his pockets, watching the ripples of shock spread through the roster. Bakugo stood frozen in front of the screen, his shoulders trembling. He wasn't looking at the top 2 names. His eyes were glued to the number 8. A quirkless extra had just secured a spot in the top 10, outperforming half the class. 8th. Bakugo hissed, his voice a jagged edge. Nearby, Shoto Todoroki finally shifted his gaze away from his own name. He looked at Haruto with a cold, analytical curiosity. In a world where power was everything, a boy who produced results with nothing but tools was unique. Wait, I'm not expelled. Midoriya's voice broke the tension, his eyes wide as he saw Aizawa walking away. It was a logical deception, Haruto said, stepping up beside the green-haired boy. Aizawa-sensei just used a permadeath threat to force a good performance out of everyone. It's a classic high-tier coaching move. Brutal, but efficient. Toru's sleeves flapped excitedly as she bounced over. Haruto. 8th place. That's amazing. Toru's invisible excitement was so palpable it practically had its own gravitational pull. Haruto offered her a 2-finger salute. It's a solid starting position, Haruto remarked. Top 10 provides a decent buffer, but it also means I'm a high-value target now. He felt the weight of several stares: Aizawa's lingering suspicion, Midoriya's bewildered hope, Todoroki's glacial curiosity, and Bakugo's concentrated nitroglycerin-flavored rage. Tomorrow, the high-budget cosplay party officially begins. Haruto thought, watching his classmates head toward the changing rooms. Chapter 9, UA's Unscripted Variable. When the blast doors at Ground Beta finally grind open, the rest of the class marches out in a parade of shimmering capes and high-density armor. Then comes Haruto, and the soundtrack in his head practically skips a beat. An oversized, slightly faded crimson-red hoodie. A heavy-duty leather tool belt, the kind plumbers wear, stuffed with rolls of duct tape, a half-eaten protein bar, and a pair of non-lethal family-friendly combat knives that look way too professional for the rest of the outfit. 2 dulled, heavy-duty practice swords strapped to his back in AX formation. A piece of masking tape on the scabbards has G-rated, safe for children, scrawled on it. They won't cut, but with Haruto's speed and strength, they'll crack ribs like a baseball bat. A black ballistic mask covered the lower half of his face, paired with construction-grade goggles. It was a salvaged set from his vigilante days, a low-budget Robin Hood kit. Haruto's costume wasn't a high-tech tactical suit. It isn't a masterpiece of the support department. It is the result of Haruto being given a deadline, and deciding that a nap was a much better use of his plot-relevant downtime. As for the risk of his vigilante past being exposed, Haruto didn't even flinch. He was well aware that with a quirk like high-spec, Principal Nizu likely already had a digitized dossier of Haruto's entire history, from his middle school transcripts to every alleyway scuffle he'd ever finished. But Haruto knew how the Chimera operated. Nizu wasn't a man of impulsive bends or redundant moralizing. To the principal, Haruto wasn't a criminal to be purged, he was a fascinating variable in a school full of powerhouses. Nizu wouldn't move against him yet. He would sit back, sipping his tea, and watch the board to see exactly how Haruto intended to tip the scales. All Might plunged his hands into the ballot boxes with enthusiasm. The first match. Team A is the heroes. Team B is the villains. Let us see the destiny of our young stars. He pulled out 2 lots. Team A, Haruto Akagi and Toru Hagakure. Versus Team B, Fumikage Tokoyami and Mizo Shoji. Haruto stared at the screen, his gloved hand coming up to adjust his goggles. A small, disappointed sigh escaped his ballistic mask. I'm paired with a set of floating gloves against a guy who talks to his own shadow and a human Swiss Army knife. Where's the stakes? Where's the drama? He looked over at Bakugo, who was currently vibrating with enough explosive main rival energy to level a city block. Seriously? Haruto narrated under his breath. I've got the grit and gears build, and I'm not even matched against Fireworks Kid over there? This isn't how a proper shounen manga is supposed to go. Where's the fated encounter? This is a C-tier side quest at best. Haruto. We're together. Toru's invisible form bounced next to him, her gloves waving frantically. A stealth expert and well, whatever you are. We're going to be totally undetectable. Haruto glanced at the G-rated swords on his back and then back at the empty space where Toru's face should be. Great, he thought. A co-op mission with a teammate who's literally missing her character model. Fine. If the writers want a tactical stealth segment instead of a boss fight, I'll give them one. But if Tokoyami starts a 5-minute monologue about the abyss, I'm skipping the dialogue. All Might pointed toward the massive concrete building. Villain team, head inside and secure the weapon. Hero team, you have 5 minutes to plan your entry. Start. All right, Team Stealth, Haruto muttered, the sharp scree of industrial strength duct tape echoing. Toru, you're the diversion. I'm the system crash. Toru's gloves bobbed in an excited nod. I'm ready. But what's with the tape? Are we repairing the building? Noise pollution, Haruto said, his goggles reflecting a faint flicker as he scanned the concrete structure. Shoji is a human radar. With those duplicated ears, he'll hear your heartbeat from 3 floors away. We aren't going to sneak past him, we're going to drown him in white noise. The timer hit 0. Haruto didn't rush the front door with a hero's shout. He moved with silence, his reinforced boots dampening the sound of his footsteps until he was a ghost in a crimson hoodie. Instead of a direct assault, he began a methodical sabotage. He slipped through the lower corridors, placing small, vibrating screwdriver nodes on the load-bearing pillars. Each one began to hum at a frequency specifically tuned to interfere with Shoji's heightened auditory sensors. Shoji's hearing is a massive advantage, but it's also a vulnerability, Haruto whispered to his invisible teammate. If we overload the local space with mechanical hums, he won't be able to distinguish your footsteps from a faulty HVAC unit. Upstairs, Shoji's multiple ears twitched violently, his head tilting in confusion. Tokoyami, something is wrong. The building, it's singing. I can't track them. The abyss is restless today, Tokoyami rasped, dark shadows swirling around him like a protective shroud. Haruto watched the mental map of the building he'd memorized. While they're busy trying to filter out the static, he reached into his plumber's belt. We go for the objective. Toru, ditch the gloves. I need you completely invisible. When I create a breach in the hallway, you slip inside and touch the weapon. I'll keep the shadow puppet occupied. Haruto pulled a specialized roll of duct tape from his belt, one he'd rigged with a series of high-intensity LEDs. Toru, close your eyes. He didn't wait for an answer. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he skipped the roll across the concrete floor. It skittered right into the center of the room where Tokoyami stood, shrouded in the swirling, sentient darkness of his quirk. The darkness is an absolute defense, Tokoyami began, his voice echoing with its usual brooding gravitas. Skip, Haruto whispered. The roll ignited. Blinding white light pulsed through the room, turning the dim warehouse into a frantic disco. Dark Shadow let out a garbled, high-pitched shriek as it shriveled instantly, retreating into Tokoyami's cloak like a scolded pet. The sudden flare left Tokoyami and Shoji clutching their eyes. Now, Toru. Capture the point. While the villains were busy rebooting their retinas, Haruto moved. He didn't even draw his girated blades. He closed the distance instantly. Tokoyami was still reeling, his hands clawing at the air where his retracted shadow had been. Haruto didn't hesitate. He stepped into the crow-headed boy's personal space, planting a palm firmly against his chest and using a quick, redirected surge of momentum to sweep his leg. With a sharp exhale, Tokoyami hit the concrete. Shoji, sensing the displacement in the air with his dupli arms, swung blindly. Haruto ducked beneath the massive limb with the fluid grace. He caught Shoji's wrist, pivoted his hips to negate the weight advantage, and delivered a precise, open palm strike to the giant's solar plexus. Hitting the off switch on his body. Shoji wheezed, his knees buckling as he slumped beside his partner. By the time the spots cleared from Tokoyami's eyes, the hero team had already won. Toru's invisible hand was resting firmly on the wannabe nuclear weapon, and Haruto was leaning against a nearby pillar, casually peeling the wrapper off his half-eaten protein bar. GG, Haruto said, while removing his mask. Next time, try investing in some blackout curtains. In the monitor room, the rest of the class watched in stunned silence. He'd just neutralized one of the strongest combat quirks in the room with a roll of tape and some flashy light. In the dimly lit monitor room, the silence was thick enough to choke on. On the screen, Haruto was casually tossing the wrapper of his protein bar into a nearby trash bin. Aizawa leaned against the back wall. He didn't look impressed, he looked tired. He felt the familiar prickle of a headache starting to bloom, the kind only a problem child could induce. He didn't just win, Aizawa rasped, his voice cutting through the quiet. He exploited every sensory vulnerability in that room. It was a master class in efficiency, wasn't it? Aizawa didn't turn around. He knew the voice. Principal Nizu was perched on a high stool in the corner, holding a cup of tea in his paws. "You've seen his file, Nizu," Aizawa said. "The police reports from the Shizuoka district. An unknown vigilante dismantling street gangs for years, and they have got nothing on him. No DNA, no fingerprints, no consistent height or weight profile, not even a confirmed quirk. It's like he is a ghost." Aizawa paused, his eyes narrowing as he watched Haruto casually lean against a pillar on the monitor. "Look at the way he moves. The efficiency. You're telling me it's a coincidence that this ghost disappears and Akagi suddenly shows up at UA?" Nizu let out a soft, high-pitched chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "Shouta, you of all people should appreciate a rational application of talent. The boy isn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He looked at the world, saw the gaps in the hero infrastructure, and decided to fill them himself." Nizu's gaze sharpened, the high-spec quirk behind his eyes whirring at 1,000,000 cycles per second. "I want to see what happens when someone who doesn't believe in the rules is forced to protect them." Chapter 10, USJ1, Foreshadowing. As Haruto stepped out of the cooling concrete tunnel of ground beta, the adrenaline was already flatlining back into his usual state of high-functioning boredom. He was busy checking the tension on his utility belt when a whir click sounded near his boots. A small, impeccably polished drone hovered at eye level. "Akagi-kun," a pre-recorded, cheerful voice chirped from the drone's speakers. It was unmistakably Nizu. "A fascinating performance. Truly a master class in resource management. I've found myself suddenly craving a specific blend of Darjeeling, and I find that tea is always better when shared with a fellow strategist." The drone tilted its camera lens, flickering green. "Please join me in the principal's office. We have much to discuss regarding your unique inventory." Haruto stared at the lens. "It seems the game master is tired of watching the stream and wants a private lobby." "Lead the way, little bot," Haruto muttered, "but if there aren't snacks, I'm charging for the consultation fee." The principal's office. The office was a shrine to high-tier intellect, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a scent of expensive tea. Nizu sat behind his desk, pouring 2 cups with terrifying precision. "Sit, Akagi-kun. Please." Haruto sank into the plush chair, resting his serrated swords against the mahogany wood. He didn't wait for an opening. "You've got the dossier, don't you? The Shizuoka alleyways, the duct tape restraints. You didn't invite me here to talk about global warming and depressed penguins." Nizu's whiskers twitched. "Straight to the point. I appreciate that. Most students spend 10 minutes stuttering about plus ultra before we get to the data. Yes, I have the files. You've been very busy the last 3 years." The chimera pushed a cup toward him. "A lot of people might think you're a criminal, a vigilante who disregards the law and bypassed the traditional path into this school. I, however, see someone who realized the current hero system has gaps and decided to fill them himself." And Haruto took a sip. It was significantly better than his protein bar. "Are you going to report me, or are we negotiating terms?" "Terms?" Nizu's bead-like eyes glittered. "I want to see how far your efficiency can go. UA is a school for heroes, yes, but it is also a laboratory for potential. You are a variable I haven't encountered in years. I will keep your history in the restricted vault." Nizu leaned forward, his voice dropping into a sharp, clinical tone. "But remember, Akagi-kun, if you cross the line, I will have no choice but to follow the letter of the law. Am I clear?" Haruto set the cup down, his expression unreadable behind his goggles. "Crystal. Just don't expect me to start wearing a cape. They're a massive safety hazard." The next day at the classroom. The classroom was buzzing with the kind of nervous energy that precedes a field trip. Aizawa stood at the front, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, holding up a remote. Today's training will be a bit different, Aizawa said. Trial of rescue. You'll be heading off-site to a specialized facility. Haruto sat in the back row, his chair balanced on two legs, staring out the window. He didn't look at the chalkboard. And there it is, he thought. The off-site training arc usually, this is where the production value spikes and the villains decide to stop being background noise. If I were a betting man, I'd say we're about 20 minutes away from a pacing shift. Haruto-kun. Are you excited? A pair of floating gloves hovered over his desk. Toru was practically vibrating in her seat next to him. Aizawa-sensei said we can wear our costumes. Haruto let the front legs of his chair thud against the floor. He looked at the empty space where her face was. It's a rescue trial, Ghost-chan. Usually, that means a lot of lifting debris and acting concerned. Don't get your hopes up for a fight sequence just yet. He winked at the camera, then said. Unless the writers are feeling spicy today. Later at the boys' locker room. The boys' locker room was a chaotic mess of ego and polyester. Bakugo was snarling at his gauntlets, and Midoriya was muttering to himself while lacing his red boots. Haruto stood in the corner, pulling on his crimson hoodie. He checked the sheaths hidden between his clothes and his back, ensuring his steel blades, not the G-rated ones, were seated perfectly. Hey, Akagi, Kirishima called out, hardening his arm experimentally. You sure you don't want some armor? You're technically quirkless, right? Haruto zipped up his hoodie. Armor just slows you down when you're trying to dodge the plot, Kirishima, Haruto said with a crooked smirk. He looked at the void over Kirishima's shoulder. Look at him. The brave sidekick archetype. He thinks armor saves people. Poor kid hasn't seen the script yet. The bus ride to the USJ was the classic travel sequence. Ida was acting like a drill sergeant, and the rest of the class was engaged in the mandatory "what's your quirk?" conversation. Haruto sat next to the window, Toru sitting across from him. He watched Tsuyu Azui bluntly break down Midoriya's power set. Your quirk is like All Might's, Tsuyu observed. Oof, Haruto thought, leaning his head against the glass. Subtlety isn't exactly the mangaka's strong suit today. That's a massive foreshadowing flag. What about you, Haruto? Kaminari asked, leaning over the seat. The medical miracle thing. Did you get a quirk out of it? Like, super vitality or something? The bus went quiet. Even Bakugo glanced over. Haruto didn't blink. Nope. Still a big fat zero on the quirk factor. I'm just a guy who's too stubborn to stay in a hospital bed. Besides, he whispered, his voice dropping to a low mutter. If I told you my survival rate was actually a biological rewrite of the genre, it would completely ruin the tension of the next 20 minutes. Spoilers are the lowest form of conversation, don't you think? He turned back to the window, catching a glimpse of the massive dome in the distance. He felt a cold itch under his skin, the merc part of him sensing a shift in the atmosphere. We're here, Aizawa announced. As the class stepped off the bus and met 13 at the entrance of the USJ, the sheer scale of the facility took everyone's breath away. Shipwrecks, landslides, fire zones, it was a playground of disasters. 13 began their speech about the power to kill versus the power to save. It was a heavy, thematic moment. Haruto, however, wasn't listening to the speech. He was watching the fountain in the center of the plaza. The air there was shimmering, a dark, oily mist beginning to swirl in the vacuum of the space. He stepped closer to Toru, his hand instinctively hovering over his back where his blades were hidden. Hey, Ghost-chan, he whispered, his voice dropping the meta-sarcasm. Remember what I said about the script? Stay vigilant. What do you mean, Haru? Bzzzt. The lights flickered. The mist expanded. A hand reached out from the darkness, followed by a pair of dead, yellow eyes. End of the prologue, he thought. Time for the gore budget to earn its keep. Chapter 11, USJ2, Plot Convenience. Haruto hit the ground of the ruins zone in a tactical crouch, his eyes already tracking the movement through the haze of the collapsed buildings. He reached for the hidden steel hilt at his back, his mind already cycling through the likely ambush points for a collapsed urban environment. Haruto. The whisper was thin. It came from a pile of shattered glass and rebar 5 feet to his right. Haruto froze. He saw a pair of standard-issue UA sneakers shaking uncontrollably against a fallen brick wall. Haruto blinked, his brow furrowing beneath his goggles. "Toru?" he asked, his voice dropping its usual edge. "What are you doing here?" She was supposed to be at the landslide zone, he thought, his eyes narrowing. "I smell plot convenience." I don't know," the invisible girl hissed, her sneakers scuffing the dust as she moved closer to him. A pair of invisible hands snagged the sleeve of his hoodie, gripping him so hard he could feel her trembling. "The mist, it just swallowed me. Everything went dark and then I was falling." "Haruto, where are we? Where is everyone else?" "Die. You extras." A massive boom rattled the windows of the apartment complex above them. Bakugo was 20 meters ahead, a human wrecking ball blowing a hole through a group of thugs. Kirishima was right beside him, his hardened skin throwing off sparks as he shouldered through a brick wall. "Get back here and fight!" Bakugo roared, his palms smoking. Haruto watched the explosions, then looked back at the shivering sneakers beside him. He shifted his gaze toward a narrow gap between 2 leaning buildings that offered a direct line of sight back to the central plaza. Down there, the Nomu, that massive, purple-skinned monstrosity with the exposed brain, was facing Aizawa. "Listen to me, Toru," Haruto said, his voice turning sharp and commanding. "Stay here. Huddle behind that reinforced pillar and don't make a sound. Bakugo and Kirishima will clear this area soon, and you'll be safe with them." "What? No." The invisible grip on his arm tightened. "Where are you going?" "Aizawa-sensei is about to get killed," Haruto muttered. "His quirk won't stop that monster's raw strength. I'm going down there to pull him out of the line of fire." "I mean, let's be real," he thought. "Even if I don't move, the sleep-deprived cocoon survives this. The script says he wakes up in a hospital bed wrapped in more bandages than a mummy, looking tragic but heroic. It's a total plot necessity. The story literally can't function without him later." "Then I'm coming with you," Toru said. "No, you aren't," Haruto snapped, his eyes cold behind his goggles. "It's too dangerous. I can move faster alone, and I don't have to worry about anyone else's safety. Just stay hidden and wait for the pros." "I'm not a civilian, Haruto." Toru's voice cracked, but there was a sudden, fierce weight to it. "You're always talking about positioning and narratives, but you're about to run into a fight with a monster that could crush you in one hit." Haruto paused, and turned his head slightly, his gaze drifting away from Toru and fixing on a point in the empty air. "I smell a cliché," he muttered. The reluctant protagonist tries to play hero alone, and the plucky sidekick insists on a dangerous team-up to prove their worth. It's a classic trope, and frankly, the writing is getting a bit predictable. "What? Who are you talking to?" Toru asked, sounding baffled. Haruto sighed, adjusting his mask. "Never mind. The writer clearly wants the emotional stakes higher for this act." He looked back at the space where her face should be. "Fine. But you do exactly what I say. No heroics." Haruto walked right to the edge of the building and looked straight down the sheer, 90-degree drop of the concrete exterior. "Haruto, please tell me we're not just falling," Toru whispered nervously. "We're wall clipping, Toru," Haruto muttered. "Concrete is just dry ice if you have the right gear," Haruto said. He turned his head toward the camera. "And here is the acrophobia subplot. Every stealth mission needs a vertical climbing segment to pad out the runtime. Can we just fast forward to the bottom? Who are you even talking to?" The pacing, Toru. I'm talking to the pacing, he sighed. He reached back, his hand finding her invisible shoulder. Get on. Secure your harness. If you scream, the villains at the bottom will look up, and will be skeet shooting practice. He felt the weight of the invisible girl lock onto his back, her arms wrapping around his neck in a death grip. Haruto didn't hesitate. He stepped off the edge. Haruto moved with a mechanical precision, finding the seams in the building's construction. He used the protruding rebar as handholds and the window ledges as temporary resting points. They reached the base of the building, dropping the final 3 meters onto the plaza floor. They weren't alone for long. Some villains were patrolling the perimeter of the ruins. Haruto stood up, dusting off his shoulder. Haruto, they're charging! Toru cried. Look at these guys, Haruto thought. The low-level mob archetype. They're just here to fill the frame while the main characters get into position. It's almost insulting how little effort the writers put into their power sets. A villain with a head like a jagged rock lunged from the mist, his fingers elongated into stone claws. A little brat playing hero? I'll crack you open. Haruto didn't even break his stride. He ducked under the clumsy swipe, his instincts mapping out the man's center of gravity before the stone claws even reached their apex. With a sharp, practiced twist, Haruto drove the hilt of his blade into the man's solar plexus and followed up with a brutal kick to the back of the knee. Crunch! As the villain collapsed, Haruto used the man's shoulders as a stepping stone, vaulting into the air. He landed in a roll, coming up just in time to face a trio of thugs blocking the path to the fountain. One had tentacles for hair, another was leaking a corrosive green slime from his palms. Don't let him past, the slime user yelled, hurling a glob of acid. Haruto's eyes narrowed. He evaded projectile as he closed the distance. He was a whirlwind of steel and kinetic energy. He sheared through a tentacle with a horizontal flash of his blade, then pivoted, driving a double-footed kick into the slime user's chest. The impact sent the villain flying back into a group of his own allies. A massive thug with quadrupedal legs charged from his flank, his shadow looming over the invisible girl. Haruto didn't hesitate. He threw his left blade like a dart. The steel whistled through the air, stabbing the villain's shoulder, staggering him and throwing off his balance. In the split second of confusion, Haruto was there, delivering a palm strike to the man's chin that snapped his head back. 3 pages of combat just to cross 20 feet, Haruto muttered to the void, retrieving his blade. He cleared the final line of thugs just as the air pressure in the plaza shifted. The heavy, suffocating aura of the Nomo was directly ahead. He looked past the groaning thugs. At the fountain, the Nomo had Aizawa pinned. The sound of the teacher's arm snapping echoed through the dome. Shigaraki was standing nearby, his fingers twitching with manic energy. The cutscene is over, Haruto whispered, his eyes narrowing. He looked at Toru. Stay behind me, Toru, Haruto commanded, his voice dropping the sarcasm. The gore budget is about to go into the red. He stepped into the shadow of the Nomu, his crimson hoodie stained with the sweat and grit of the climb. He looked at the creature's exposed brain and then at Shigaraki's dead, yellow eyes. Sorry I'm late to the party, Haruto rasped, his voice dropping into that cold tone. The extras were a bit clingy. Chapter 12, USJ 3, The Treatment. The air in the central plaza felt different now. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure of a boss encounter. The Nomu stood over Aizawa's broken form, its beak clicking in a mechanical twitch. Shigaraki was scratching his neck, his eyes wide and bloodshot, staring at the glitch who had just carved a path through his vanguard. Nomu, Shigaraki rasped. The brat with the blades. He's ruining the immersion. Take his arms. The creature didn't just move, it disappeared. Haruto's instincts screamed a warning before his eyes could even register the motion. He didn't try to block, he threw himself into a desperate, bone-wrenching backflip. The Nomu's fist whistled through the air where his head had been a millisecond before, the sheer wind pressure tearing the hood off Haruto's hoodie. Damn, Haruto thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the camera. Look at that frame rate. This isn't a combat sequence, it's a slaughter. If I were a normal protagonist, this is where the flashback to my training would start. Haruto, get away from it. Toru's panicked voice sounded from the edge of the fountain. Stay back, Toru. Haruto roared, his voice cracking. He lunged. He didn't go for the torso. He knew about the shock absorption from his meta-knowledge. He went for the joints. He slid between the Nomu's massive legs, his steel blades flashing in a twin arc. He sheared through the back of the creature's knees, the steel biting deep into the purple muscle. The Nomu let out a screech, its legs buckling for a fraction of a second. Target the tendons, Haruto muttered, his eyes tracking the Nomu's rapid regeneration as the wounds began to knit shut instantly. His healing is fast, but the physics still apply. If it can't stand, it can't swing. He vaulted off the creature's broad back, driving a blade into its exposed brain. The steel sank in, but the Nomu didn't even flinch. It reached back with a hand the size of a dinner plate, catching Haruto by the ankle. Oh, crap, Haruto whispered. The unstoppable grab trope. I hate this one. The Nomu slammed him into the concrete. Thud. Haruto felt his collarbone snap. Crack. Before he could even gasp, the creature slammed him again. Haruto. No. Toru shrieked. She couldn't stay back anymore. Whether it was bravery or pure, unadulterated panic, the invisible girl sprinted forward. She grabbed a heavy piece of discarded villain gear, a metal pipe, and swung it at the Nomu's head. Clang! The pipe bounced off the creature's skin like it was made of rubber. The Nomu's head slowly rotated toward her, its blank, yellow eyes locking onto the space where her terrified breathing was. A hidden player. Shigeriki's voice was a dry crawl. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his 5 fingers toward her. I'll start with the girl. She's easier to break. Don't you touch her. Haruto's voice wasn't meta anymore. It was a primal roar. The construction crew in his blood exploded into a violent frenzy. His snapped collarbone ground back into place with a sickening pop. He didn't wait for his legs to fully heal, he pushed off the ground with a force that shattered the concrete beneath him. He intercepted Shigaraki mid-stride. Haruto threw a devastating, desperation-fueled roundhouse kick into Shigeriki's chest. The impact sent the villain skidding backward toward the fountain, his heels sparking against the stone. But the redirection of his momentum left Haruto's back wide open. A shadow loomed over him. The Nomu had closed the distance in a single, silent leap. It didn't punch. It drove its massive hand straight through Haruto's back. Squelch! The sound was a wet, horrific thud followed by the snapping of a spine. The creature's arm emerged from the front of Haruto's crimson hoodie, dripping with visceral red. Haruto! A scream from the nearby students echoed. The Nomu retracted its arm with a violent, indifferent jerk. Haruto collapsed, hitting the pavement with a dull thud. A gaping hole was torn through his abdomen. Daylight was visible through his torso. Shigaraki stood up, clutching his bruised chest, a manic, raspy laugh escaping his throat. The glitch is cleared, good job Nomu. Eraserhead's eyes burned. The blood vessels in his retinas felt like they were about to burst as he forced his gaze toward the Nomu, but the creature had already retracted its arm, leaving nothing but a hollowed-out silhouette where a boy had just been standing. Aizawa's capture scar flashed out. His professional composure, that carefully maintained wall of rationality, shattered. Haruto. The name died in his throat, replaced by pure fury. Shigeriki's raspy, manic laughter was a serrated blade against his nerves. You, bastard, Aizawa hissed, his voice trembling. Toru fell to her knees beside the body, her invisible hands hovering over the massive wound, trying to stem a flow of blood that was already staining the pavement a dark, narratively significant crimson. Her sobbing was a raw, broken sound that filled the sudden silence of the plaza. Boom! The front doors of the USJ didn't just open, they were erased in a golden explosion of pressure. "I am here." All Might stepped through the dust, his signature smile replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He crashed into the Nomu, the impact creating a crater that shook the entire dome. The struggle of titans began, a hurricane of fists and shockwaves that forced the students to shield their eyes. As the giants clashed, Toru fell was beside him, her invisible hands hovering over the massive wound, trying to stem a flow of blood that was already staining the pavement. "No, no, no," she sobbed, the sound raw and suffocating. "You said you were the narrator, Haruto. Narrators don't die." She reached out, her gloves finally making contact with his cooling skin. She pulled his head into her lap, her invisible tears dripping onto his pale, still face, washing away streaks of soot and crimson. Around them, the titans clashed. All Might and the Nomu were a hurricane of sonic booms and flying debris, but Toru didn't flinch as a piece of the fountain shattered 5 feet away. She didn't care about the symbol of peace. She didn't care about the villains. "Wake up, you liar," she wailed, her voice cracking into a scream. "You're the only one who sees me." From the stairs, the rest of Class 1A watched in a state of catatonic shock. They couldn't see Toru, but they saw Haruto's head being cradled in the air. They saw his blood soaking into the invisible fabric of her costume, outlining her shaking knees and arms in a gruesome, macabre silhouette. Midoriya was on his knees, his hands clawing at the dirt. To them, the medical miracle had finally run out of time. The boy who beat death once had just been erased for a girl who spent her life being ignored. Then, the sound began. Pop. Snap. Squish. It wasn't steam. It was the sound of a system rebooting at the cellular level. Inside the gaping hole in his stomach, muscle fibers braided themselves back together with electric speed. The shattered vertebrae snapped back into alignment with a series of metallic pops. It was the sound of industrial-grade biology working at overtime. Inside the hole in Haruto's abdomen, the construction crew was screaming. Muscle fibers wove themselves together like high-speed needles. The spine clicked back into alignment. The skin drew itself shut, knitting over the void in his torso with the sound of a zipper closing. Haruto's hand twitched. He coughed, a thick glob of blood hitting the floor, and pushed himself up on trembling arms. He looked past the sobbing, invisible girl, staring directly into the void with a blood-streaked grin. "Did I cough? Did I just get the ACE treatment? Seriously, if I'd stayed down any longer, some rubber man would have spent the next 10 episodes crying about me. Besides," he added, glancing back at the void with a wink. "The fans saw it coming anyway. You can't build up a medical miracle for 12 chapters just to waste the reveal on a nameless mob summon." The foreshadowing was basically a neon sign at this point. Toru jumped back, a gasp catching in her throat. She watched, horrified and mesmerized, as the skin closed over the wound, leaving nothing but a faint pink line that vanished a second later. Haruto's eyes snapped open. He sat up with a sharp inhale, rotating his neck until it gave a loud, satisfying crack. "Ugh," Haruto groaned, his voice gravelly but steady. He looked down at the massive, blood-soaked hole in his hoodie and sighed. Of course. The noble sacrifice trope. Could this script be any more cliché? I finally get a cool action sequence and the writers decide to sacrifice me for emotional stakes. "Don't cry, Toru," Haruto said, looking at the invisible girl with a grin. "I've still got way too much plot armor to die for a mid-tier boss like that bird brain." Chapter 13, USJ End, Narrative Camouflage. The dust from All Might's initial impact was still settling, but for Class 1A, the real shockwave was standing right in front of them, wiping blood off his chin. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant booming of All Might's fists. Midoriya was on his knees a few yards away, his hands trembling as he stared at Haruto. His vitals were gone, he muttered. That was a horror movie, Mineta shrieked from behind a rock. He had a hole in him. You could see the floor through his chest. People don't just zip themselves back together. He's a zombie. Akagi. The voice came from the edge of the plaza. Bakugo and Kirishima had just burst through the wreckage of the collapse zone. Bakugo's face contorted as he looked at the massive lake of blood Haruto was standing in. Hey, Deku! Why is the extra standing in a puddle of guts like he's waiting for a bus? Ribbit! Tsuyu croaked from the fountain ledge, her eyes wide. He had a hole in his chest just moments ago, Haruto-chan. Bakugo let out a snarl, his eyes darting between Midoriya and Haruto. First the damn nerd shows up with a hidden power he's been sitting on for years, and now you. He pointed a smoking palm at Haruto. What the hell is it with you pathetic extras? You're both the same, hiding behind a quirkless label. His heart stopped, he was a corpse. It should have been game over for him. Shigaraki lunged forward a step, hand outstretched as if to personally decay the glitch. But Kurogiri's mist pulled him back. We have to leave, Tomura Shigaraki, Kurogiri urged. The pro-heroes are here. Shigaraki didn't look at the entrance. He stared at Haruto with a look of pure hatred. I'll find out what you are, Shigaraki's final rasp echoed as the portal began to collapse. And when I do, I'm going to tear you apart so thoroughly that there won't be enough of you left to remember how to breathe. This isn't a victory, you freak. With a swirl, the villains vanished. All Might didn't have his signature boisterous laugh. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes glowing in the shadows of his brow. To think you would target children. All Might's voice vibrated, to think you would commit such atrocities in a place of learning. Carolina. Smash. He crossed his arms in a brutal strike. The resulting shockwave sent the remaining low-tier villains tumbling like autumn leaves. The Nomu took the hit dead center. Its purple flesh rippled like a stone dropped in a pond. Haruto sat by fountain, his eyes tracking the destruction. Here we go, Haruto thought, glancing at the camera with a smirk. The Battle of the Titans. The part where the animation studio spends 80% of the seasonal budget on a 3-minute sequence. The Nomu lunged. It occupied the space where All Might had been a millisecond prior. The two collided in the center of the plaza, a series of sonic booms that shattered the remaining glass in the dome. Every time All Might landed a punch that would have leveled a building, the Nomu's shock absorption nullified it. Every time the Nomu struck back, All Might's sheer willpower forced him to tank the blow, his feet carving deep trenches into the floor. All Might's muscles bulged, the fabric of his hero suit straining. You said this thing was built to kill me. All Might roared. If it can withstand 100% of my power, then I will simply force it to take more. Every hit is more than 100%. The air pressure became a physical weight, forcing the students to shield their eyes. Plus, All Might buried his fist into the Nomu's gut, the impact creating a vacuum that sucked the surrounding dust inward. Ultra. A pillar of pure energy erupted from the center of the plaza, punching a hole straight through the reinforced roof of the USJ. The Nomu was launched like a violet rocket, disappearing into the clouds. Haruto whistled, shielding his eyes from the falling debris as the shockwave finally subsided. Now that, he whispered to the void watching the silhouette of All Might standing tall amidst the steam, is how you end the arc maximum budget. Minimum dialogue. Total aura. Haruto leaned back against the bus seat, watching Bakugo's palm smoke and Midoriya's pen hover over the page. Start talking, you freak, Bakugo hissed. I'm not going to ask again. What kind of back-alley deal did you make to get a power like that? And don't give me that quirkless garbage. I've spent 10 years watching Deku pretend to be a pebble while he was sitting on some kind of weird power. Now I find out the other extra is a walking anomaly. Midoriya leaned forward from the seat in front, his notebook already out, though his hands were shaking too much to write. Haruto. Kaken is right about one thing. Regeneration of that scale, even for a high-spec quirk, there's usually a massive caloric drain. But you just reset. It was like time reversed for your internal organs. Haruto didn't look away from the window. It's called narrative consistency, Greenie. You wouldn't get it, Haruto said. Stop with the cryptic crap. Bakugo roared, slamming a hand against the headrest. You were dead. You're either a liar like Midoriya, or you're something that shouldn't be in this hero school. Which is it? Are you a spy? An experiment? He sighed. Fine, Haruto said, you want the technical specs? You want the quirk registration entry? Fine. Let's call it cellular stockpile. Midoriya's eyes lit up instantly. Stockpile? Like a kinetic charge? Or a biological reserve? Biological, Haruto lied through his teeth. I don't heal, I replace. My body has a preset save state of healthy tissue. When the physical shell takes damage, like, say, a hand through the torso, the construction crew in my marrow dumps the entire reserve to force a localized regeneration. It's not magic, Bakugo. It's just high-speed 3D printing with stem cells. Bakugo narrowed his eyes, his aggression shifting into a cold appraisal. If it's a stockpile, that means it's finite. You aren't immortal then. Exactly, Haruto said. Midoriya was scribbling furiously now. That explains the exhaustion. And the blood, the old cells are discarded as waste during the overwrite. That's why there was so much of it on the floor. Haruto, the caloric intake for a quirk like that must be astronomical. Haruto suppressed a smirk. He's buying it. He's actually rationalizing the glitch into the power system. Man, I love it when the characters do the power scaling for me. So you've been hiding it because it's a last resort type of power? Kirishima asked from the seat in front, his face full of manly sympathy. That's heavy, man. You're literally burning your lifespan every time you save one of us. Haruto looked at his hand, then clenched it into a fist. Something like that, he whispered, his voice dripping with just enough protagonist energy to be convincing. Bakugo scoffed and turned away, finally sitting down. Whatever. Just don't expect me to hold back during the sports festival just because you're fragile underneath that cheat-looking ability. Haruto turned back to the window, watching the UA gates loom closer. Haruto muttered to the void. I just gave them a power with a price trope. It's the ultimate narrative camouflage. The bus pulled into the UA gate. As the rest of Class 1A filed out, Toru remained in the seat beside him. The fabric of her school uniform shifted as she leaned closer. You're lying to them, Haruto, she said. It wasn't an accusation, her voice was thin, still carrying the panic she felt back in the plaza. Haruto didn't look away from the window at first. He watched his own reflection in the glass. Then, he turned his head slowly to the empty space beside him. That was a pretty detailed medical explanation, Haruto said. Midoriya is already halfway through a 10-page thesis on my cellular stockpile theory. Even Bakugo stopped shouting. So, tell me, Ghost-chan, how do you know I'm lying? Because I was right there, Toru hissed, her invisible hand tightening on his arm. I wasn't across the plaza like the others. I was kneeling in the blood, Haruto. I heard your heart stop, and then I heard it start again. She shifted in her seat, the fabric of her sleeve brushing against his torn hoodie. And you didn't look tired, she continued, her voice trembling. If you were really burning your life away, you'd be shaking. You'd be gray. But the second that hole closed, you just looked bored. You treated a lethal injury like it was a smudge on your sleeve. Haruto leaned back, a genuine smile on his face. Sharp. I guess being invisible makes you a natural at seeing the things people try to hide, he sighed. You're right. I'm not dying. But Bakugo and Midoriya won't stop digging until they have a how and a why. If I don't give them a tragic reason to back off, they'll never leave me alone. It's a cruel thing to tell people, Toru whispered. Don't ever try that one on me. I'm the one who had to watch it happen. I thought I was losing you. The stoic mask Haruto usually wore cracked just a little. He reached out, his hand finding her invisible head and patting it. I'm sorry, Toru. I didn't mean to scare you that much. No more noble sacrifices for at least a few weeks. I promise. Toru let out a shaky, invisible laugh. You're so full of yourself. Maybe, Haruto muttered, pushing himself up as the bus reached its destination. But someone has to keep the plot moving, right? If I don't stay in the picture, who's going to make sure you get your screen time? Chapter 14, Mason. Haruto was now at the infirmary. As Recovery Girl adjusted her visor, he sat on the edge of the high examination table, swinging his legs and munching on popcorn. About the cellular stockpile thing. Recovery Girl began to speak. It's a solid narrative bridge, Cho-san. Midoriya needed a how, and Bakugo needed to get off my ass. If I didn't give them a price tag for the miracle, they would have spent the next semester trying to solve a mystery that doesn't belong to the plot. She narrowed her eyes, stepping closer to peer at the skin of his abdomen. She didn't even need to use her quirk to know the truth. There was no lingering exhaustion, no caloric depletion, and, most importantly, no scar tissue. I've spent 40 years accelerating the healing process of thousands of heroes, she said. I know what a stockpile looks like, and this is not one them. She pressed a stethoscope to his chest. The heartbeat was steady and impossibly calm. You're registered as quirkless, Haruto. And this doesn't look like a quirk to me. Haruto offered her the bag of popcorn. She ignored it. Logic over luck, right? Haruto grinned, maybe I'm just a very high-fidelity 3D printer. Recovery Girl sighed, she knew technical lie when she heard one. She also knew that if she pressed him, he'd just start rambling about weird stuff like character development and spoilers. You are free to leave now, but, she grumbled, turning back to her desk to sign his release forms. I'm warning you, if you come to my infirmary after sustaining such injury again, I'm going to personally dissect you to see what you're hiding in there. Noted, Haruto said, hopping off the table. But hey, Cho-san? Look on the bright side. Think of how much paperwork I'm saving you by not being dead. Hush now, you can go, you little brat. She shooed him toward the door. Then she simply watched him walk out, as if he hadn't just had a hole blown through him a few hours ago. Next morning. In the small Akagi apartment, the atmosphere was thick and quiet. His mother, Hana, was a woman who lived in the real world, far removed from the high-stakes narrative Haruto saw everywhere. Haruto sat at the small table. He had been careful, the crimson hoodie he'd worn during the attack was already at the bottom of a dumpster 3 blocks away. You're not eating, Haruto, Hana said, sliding a plate in front of him. Her hands stayed on the edge of the table, her knuckles a bit white. I saw the news. They said the villains broke through. They said it was a war zone. Haruto didn't look up. It was just a scripted encounter, Mom. Nothing I couldn't handle. Hana pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down heavily. She didn't use his metaphors. She didn't care about mobs the school called yesterday. About your registration update. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Quirkless for 15 years, and now. Cellular stockpile. They told me it's an emergency use quirk. That it costs you life to use it. They said you manifested it during the attack. Haruto finally put the spoon down. He looked at her, and for a second, the mask slipped. He saw a woman who didn't see a protagonist, she just saw her son, who had spent a decade and a half being normal and safe. It's just a mechanic, Mom, Haruto said softly. It's how I stay in the game. If I don't have a quirk, they'll write me out. I have to have a reason to be there. I liked it better when you were just my Haruto, she said, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. You were safe. Now you're going on national television to show the world how much you can sacrifice. Is that really the life you want? To be a hero who pays for every victory with his own health? Haruto squeezed her hand back. He felt the weight of her reality, the heavy, non-fictional fear of a mother. That was a lie, Haruto said flatly. He pulled his hand back and leaned into the chair, the mask sliding back into place. The school needs a tragedy to make the power make sense. The audience needs a cost so they don't feel cheated when I win. If I told the truth, they'd be terrified. Hannah blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. You lied to UA? You lied to the doctors? Haruto, why would you say something so horrible about yourself if it isn't true? Because nothing good will come out from revealing truth, Haruto replied, grabbing his bag and standing up. Besides, he added, UA's staff isn't incompetent, they're granting me a certain amount of latitude for now. I'm not dying. I wanted you to know so you don't waste your energy worrying. He walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Don't tell anyone, he added, looking back with a smile. It ruins the immersion. As the door clicked shut behind him, he felt the heavy real-world stakes of the kitchen dissolve. Inside a workshop located in a high-density industrial sector on the outskirts of Musutafo, hidden away from hero-patrolled boulevards, Mason, a broad-shouldered American with large forearms, sat hunched over a heavy-duty lathe. He'd come to Japan a decade ago after a disagreement with a private military contractor in the States, bringing his blueprints and his bitterness with him. You're late, Mason rasped. And you smell like hospital disinfectant. Haruto stepped into the light. He wore a white t-shirt, black pants, a red cap on his head and sunglasses covering his eyes. Hospital disinfectant? That's my new cologne, Mason. I call it Trauma by Calvin Klein, Haruto replied in English, with an American accent. It was a private language between them. He hopped onto a metal workbench, swinging his legs. And for the record, the USJ was a total Season 1 finale disaster. 2 years ago, Haruto had found this shop while scouting for high-quality hardware. And one day he came by to find a debt collection crew, led by a villain who erupts spikes from his skin, trying to ransack his shop. Dozens of jagged, bone-like spikes had erupted from the leader's forearms and chest. Mason was a master machinist, so to save the asset Haruto had walked directly into a volley of those spikes. One had punched through his lung. He'd stood back up 5 seconds later, pulled the bone spike out of his chest, and neutralized the leader and his crew single-handedly, while Mason stared in awe. I lost the last pair of blades you made me, Haruto said. Mason finally killed the power to the lathe, the spinning rod of titanium slowing to a halt. He pushed his goggles up. Those were high-carbon steel, kid. Good blades, but they weren't meant to survive a war zone. Exactly. They were a budget solution for a student budget, Haruto replied. They notched when I hit the reinforced flesh on that creature. I need an upgrade. Tungsten carbide. Mason whistled. Tungsten carbide? You know how brittle that stuff is in a long blade. You hit something wrong, and it shatters like glass. I trust your engineering, Mason. Jacket it, do whatever the American way dictates. But I need it. And I need 2 Desert Eagles, modified of course. I want them to whisper sleepy time. Why ballistics? Self-defense, Mason asked. Self-defense? Haruto repeated the question. Mason, buddy, self-defense is such a boring, PR-friendly term. It's what you tell the cops when they find a guy folded like a lawn chair in a dumpster. Haruto leaned in closer with a grin. These writers? They're lazy, Mason. They love a 10-minute power of friendship monologue where everyone stands around crying while the city burns. It's exhausting. He mimicked the racking of a slide with his hands. But a desert eagle? It's for those moments when the villain is mid-speech and I'm just not feeling the dialogue. Mason sighed, fine. I'll start the mill. But keep them off campus. Haruto tilted his head as he looked at Mason's unimpressed expression. He felt a sense of nostalgia. You know, Mason, did I ever tell you that you remind me of an old friend? He owned a bar, had a face like a topographical map of Utah. You've got that same I'm only helping you because I'm bored and you're probably going to die energy. It's comforting, really. Mason didn't even act surprised, he was already used to the kids rambling by now. Haruto hopped off the workbench. He adjusted the brim of his red cap. I'll come later for the pickup. Haruto said. Mason didn't look up from his lathe. He just grunted. Just bring the remaining credits, kid. And try not to get yourself killed. Oh, Mason, you big softy. I knew that North Carolina heart of yours was beating for me, Haruto chirped. He then turned towards the door and left the workshop. Chapter 15, Shopping. Back at the Akagi residence. Haruto stepped into the dining room. His mother was seated at the head of the table, and seated beside her was a floating set of casual clothes, a soft hoodie and leggings. They were chatting casually before Haruto came in. Finally, his mother said, resting her ladle against a pot she was holding. Sit down, Haruto. As Haruto pulled out his chair, he felt the weight of two pairs of invisible eyes locking onto him, practically vibrating with snitch energy. We were just talking about the sports festival. You know, you don't actually have to participate. I've heard it's an intense competition, and I've seen enough intense from you this week, his mother said with a weary expression. I hear you, Mom, I'm planning on a low-profile run. I'll stay in the middle of the pack, do enough to pass the qualifiers. Toru turned her invisible head face to Hana, a mischievous smile on her face. Mrs. Akagi, you have no idea. He's already talking about speedrunning the obstacle course. He told me he's going to find a way to finish without even touching the ground. Haruto then faced the invisible snitch, with a betrayed expression. Spoilers are bad, Toru, he muttered. Don't ruin the experience for the readers. Haruto turned his gaze toward the empty corner. See this? This is what happens when your supporting cast gets too much screen time. They start leaking the strategy before the event even starts. His mother blinked. The readers? Haruto, I'm the only one here besides Toru. Are you talking to those internet ghosts again? Toru started giggling. Oh, ignore him, Mrs. Akagi. He's just upset because I'm exposing him. He wants everyone to think he's just winging it, but he has actually spent the last day planning how to phase through the obstacle course without even touching the ground. He just loves the attention. Haruto rubbed the bridge of his nose. It's called information security, Toru, Haruto muttered. You're ruining the engagement for the sake of a domestic subplot. Anyway, Hana sighed. We'll talk about this later. For now let's just eat. She said, finally setting the heavy pot in the center of the table. The meal eventually ended, reaching its natural conclusion. Toru stood up, and pushed her chair back. Well, Mrs. Akagi, as much as I love watching Haruto have a meltdown over his spoilers, I should probably get home before my parents start a search party. Of course, Toru, Hana said with a smile. Thank you for keeping an eye on this boy. He needs the supervision. Haruto stood up as well, reaching for his keys. He glanced at his mother. Hey, Mom. Since I'm walking Toru back, do you need anything from the grocery store? Hana blinked, surprised. Oh. Yes, actually. Grab some milk and those ginger candies. And Haruto? Try to stay on the sidewalk. Copy that, Mom, Haruto muttered. The cool night air hit them the second they stepped onto the porch. Haruto walked with his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the shadows out of habit. Seriously though, Toru said, breaking the silence. Do you think I'll be able to keep up? I feel like my power isn't exactly built for competition. Don't overthink the script, Toru, he said, his voice steady. You'll be all right. Toru was quiet for a second, her hoodie bobbing as she looked at him. You really think so? I know so, he muttered. Suddenly, she bumped his shoulder playfully, then reached out and asked. Speaking of which, what did you do with your hero suit anyway? You know, the casual crimson hoodie. I threw it. It had a hole in the center the size of a dinner plate, Haruto replied. You just threw it? Haruto, that was basically your brand. She nudged him again, giggling. Well, how about you come to the mall with me tomorrow? We're getting you some new clothes. Haruto paused. A slow, mischievous smirk on his face. He leaned a little, and said. The mall? On a Saturday. He glanced at the empty space where her face would be. Wait, is the romance tag finally working? Are we pivoting into a date episode right before the tournament arc? Toru froze. For a second, the only sound was the distant hum of a passing car. Then, her invisible sleeve whipped out and smacked his shoulder. It's a mercy mission, you idiot. A charity for the fashionably challenged event. She squawked, her voice jumping 2 octaves. Haruto just chuckled. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Ghost-chan. Toru laughed, waving an invisible hand as she reached her gate. See you tomorrow, Haruto. Don't forget your mom's milk. The next day, Haruto stood outside the mall entrance, his hands shoved into his pockets. He wore a plain dark t-shirt. You're late, he muttered. The mall arc usually starts at 10 a.m. sharp. I am not late. I was perfecting my stealthy look. Toru's voice chirped from thin air, right in front of him. A moment later, a pair of light denim overalls and a striped t-shirt seemed to materialize as she stepped out of the crowd. And anyway, a protagonist is supposed to wait for the heroine. Haruto gave the floating outfit a sweeping look. Right. The heroine who looks like a set of invisible laundry. Let's get this over with. The mall was a sensory overload of neon signs, pop music, and the smell of overpriced pretzels. As they navigated the sea of shoppers, Haruto kept his eyes moving, instinctively mapping out the exits and the line of sight for security cameras. So, Toru said, her invisible sleeves swinging as she walked. Are we looking for a direct replacement? Or are we doing a total character redesign? Both. I'm actually picking up a replacement for the crimson set, gotta keep the look consistent, after all. But I also need a spare in black, Haruto said, pausing in front of the high-end streetwear shop. He moved through the racks ignoring the flashy trends. He grabbed a vibrant crimson hoodie that matched his old one perfectly, then reached for a matte black version of the same cut. Double slotting, hey? Toru giggled, watching him carry both to the counter. You're starting to sound like someone who actually cares about his appearance. It's called inventory management, Toru, Haruto countered. I'm not leaving my character design up to a random loot drop anymore. After an hour of Toru treating the mall like a high-speed looting simulator, they ended up at the food court with a tray of takoyaki. See? That wasn't so hard, Toru said, her invisible form leaning back in the plastic chair. You have a new hoodie, and I got these cute ribbons. Haruto popped a piece of takoyaki into his mouth, his eyes scanning the crowd for any random encounters that looked suspicious. Don't get comfortable, Ghost-chan. The pacing in this place is suspicious. We've been here for 2 hours and haven't hit a single plot-relevant ambush yet. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping low. Wait, is the camera panning toward that guy by the fountain? He's wearing a trench coat in April. That's a classic mid-tier villain look. Toru let out a bubbly laugh that made a few nearby shoppers turn their heads in confusion at the empty chair. Haruto, he's just a guy waiting for his girlfriend. Not everything is a scripted event. That's exactly what a secondary character would say right before the building explodes, Haruto muttered. Anyway, he said, standing up, let's go home before th. Toru didn't wait for the meta-commentary to finish, before she stormed toward the exit. Race you to the exit! Toru shouted, her clothes already blurring into the crowd. Hey! No using invisibility to cheat the physics one. Haruto called out, though he was already moving. He was scanning the environment ready for whatever random encounter they could face. Just as they reached the sliding glass doors, Haruto stopped dead. Leaning against a concrete pillar was a tall, hooded figure, and he was staring intently at a small, glowing device in his hand. The mall encounter. It's too early in the season for the Dust Man to make his move. Should I just wipe his ass right now? Haruto thought, his eyes narrowing. Toru. Stay behind me. Haruto? What are you? The hooded figure suddenly looked up to reveal a perfectly ordinary, middle-aged man holding a grocery list. He blinked at Haruto, looking confused by the teenager's intense combat stance, before wandering off toward the pharmacy. Haruto stood frozen for a 3-second count. Right, Haruto muttered, adjusting his jacket. Talk about a bait and switch. The writers are really phoning it in today. A bystander. Toru chirped. Haruto, you were ready to drop a combo on a guy looking for groceries. He was radiating villainous aura, Toru. It's not my fault the environmental storytelling is misleading, Haruto countered. As they stepped out into the parking lot, Haruto glanced back one last time at the mall. Fine. No scripted ambush today. But it's probably for the best. The story needs his mess. One, he means that she is using her invisibility to phase through the crowd. It is not happening, of course. Chapter 16, Targeted. The atmosphere in the bar was suffocating. The TV screen remained dark, a silent monument to their retreat from the USJ. Suddenly, the monitor flickered to life. The familiar ADIO logo appeared, and the room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Report, Tamura, the voice of All for One echoed through the speakers. The symbol of peace still breathes. The anti-symbol Nomu is gone. Tell me, what did we gain from this venture? Shigaraki slammed a hand onto the bar, the wood beginning to crack under his palm. It was a glitch, sensei. The pros got there too fast, and the kids, those brats were more of a nuisance than expected. Kurogiri set the glass he was holding down. It was not entirely a loss, master. While the primary objective failed, we encountered a variable that warrants your specific attention. A student from Class 1A Haruto Akagi. The respirator on the other end hissed. A student? You know I care little for the fodder of the hero course unless they possess something unique. He does, Kurogiri continued. During the skirmish, he sustained an injury that should have been fatal. Yet, the wound closed in a seconds. There was a long, heavy silence from the monitor. Regeneration, All for One finally whispered. True high-speed regeneration is a rarity, Tamura. Most healing quirks are taxing, requiring time, nutrients, or external energy. Shigaraki looked up, his eyes narrowing. He looked like one of your pets, sensei. The way the skin crawled back into place, it was disgusting. An astute observation, All for One replied. The super regeneration we gave the Nomu is a patchwork of multiple factors. If this boy possesses a singular, natural quirk that mimics that efficiency, he is a treasure beyond the USJ's failure. Should we move on him? Shigaraki hissed, his fingers twitching. I can go back. I'll bring him to you, sensei. No, All for one commanded, his tone sharpening. A fruit that is plucked too early lacks the proper sweetness. The screen began to dim as the mastermind's parting words echoed in the bar. Observe him, Kurogiri. If his quirk is as durable as I suspect, I will eventually have a very special place for him in my collection. All Might walked back and forth in the small room before stopping. He turned to Nizu, a weary expression on his face. I talked with Recovery Girl after the USJ incident. Nizu tilted his head holding a teacup in his paws. And what was her assessment? She is usually quite blunt about the students' limits. She was unsettled, All Might said, coughing into a handkerchief. He leaned over the desk, his sunken eyes wide. She's seen every healing and regeneration type in the book. But she told me she has never seen anything like this. Usually, a body uses its own stamina to knit together, leaving the patient exhausted. But young Akagi? Cho said his cells were replicating. Nizu, All Might began, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly whisper. I can't shake this feeling of unease. I saw the boy. He had gaping wound on his chest. He turned, his sunken eyes burning with a mix of pity and anger. But by the time the paramedics reached him, the wound was just gone. Not a scar. Not even a faint mark. All Might slammed a fist lightly against the wall. I've seen what All for One is capable of, and those monsters he stitches together. What if Haruto isn't just a student? What if he's an escapee? A success that fled a lab before they could break his mind. A heavy theory, Toshinori, Nizu said softly. He took a slow sip of his tea and said. The data I have is inconveniently clean. His records from birth are consistent. There are no missing years, no mysterious gaps in his history. But a quirk like that, if he is not some kind of an experiment, Nizu, then nature has played a very strange trick on that boy. Nizu set his cup down. Then we must be very careful with how we frame his story. The tension in Class 1A was no longer the energy of the first week. It was heavy silence of 20 people who had seen a hole in a classmate's chest. In the back of the room, Haruto sat with his feet up on the desk, staring at the ceiling. He was playing with a small, heavy coin, flipping it over his knuckles. Clack clack clack. You're going to give yourself a migraine if you keep staring at the lights like that, a voice muttered from the desk over. Haruto tilted his head. Jiro was leaning back, her earphone jacks twining around her fingers. She wasn't looking at him, she was staring at the doorway. I'm just meditating, Haruto said, the coin dancing over his ring finger. You're a real ray of sunshine, Akagi, Kaminari said, leaning over the back of his chair. He looked unusually pale. But seriously, are you okay? Like, actually? The doctors at UA are good, but I saw what happened at the USJ. You're acting like you just tripped and skinned a knee. The room went quiet. It was the question everyone had been wanting to ask since the bus ride back. Even Todoroki, who usually treated the rest of the class like background noise, shifted his gaze toward the back row. The coin stopped mid-air. Haruto caught it, but he didn't tuck it away. He looked at Kaminari's twitchy hands, then at Jiro who was looking away despite her jacks being angled toward him. Lastly, his eyes shifted to Kirishima, who had just joined the small circle around his desk. Actually, Haruto said he let his feet drop from the desk, sitting up straight. Thanks. For the worry, I mean it. The shift in the room was subtle but immediate. Kaminari blinked, his nervous energy smoothing out into a surprised silence. Even Bakugo, who was halfway out the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I spent 3 years being a case study, Haruto continued, looking down at the coin in his palm. I'm not used to having a team, let alone one that cares if I crack a rib. So, yeah. I appreciate it. He glances at the camera with a panicked look. Don't worry, we're not turning into a power of friendship trope. But I can't be a jerk to people who actually give a damn if I breathe. Kirishima's grin widened, his teeth sharp and bright. He slammed a fist into his palm. Hell yeah, Akagi. That's the spirit. We're all in this together, even if we're trying to kick each other's butts tomorrow. Just don't get sentimental on us, it'll ruin your edgy commentary vibe, Jiro muttered. The sliding door of the classroom groaned open. Aizawa stepped in, his face was still heavily bandaged from the USJ incident, making him look more like a weary mummy than a teacher. The room fell deathly silent. Aizawa scanned the room with his one visible eye. He walked to the podium. The sports festival is a battle of reconnaissance as much as physical ability. Every pro hero in the country will be watching you. Some will look for raw power. Others will look for strategy. Go home. Rest. If you show up tomorrow with your head in the clouds, you'll be out in the first round. I don't teach losers. Understood, Sensei, the students shouted in unison. Good, Aizawa muttered, class dismissed. The classroom emptied quickly after Aizawa's dismissive grunt. Haruto was already halfway through door with Toru's invisible presence following him, when Aizawa's voice cut through the silence. Akagi. Stay behind. A moment. Toru's sleeve brushed Haruto's arm. Go on, Ghost-chan. The sensei probably just wants to lecture me on my posture again. Don't be late, she whispered, and left the classroom. Aizawa didn't speak immediately. He stayed at the podium, his bandaged hands sorting through a stack of papers with mechanical movements. Haruto just leaned against a desk, crossing his arms. If this is about the stockpile theory, Midoriya's notes are probably more accurate than my own memory, Haruto said, with a flat tone. Don't play games with me, I don't care what you told the class, tomorrow, you're stepping onto a stage in front of the entire world. The media, the villains, and every hero agency in Japan will be dissecting your every move. He stopped a few feet from Haruto, the white bandages around his face making his gaze even more intimidating. If your regeneration is as infinite as it looked back there, you're going to have a target on your back larger than All Might's. People kill for immortality, Akagi. Haruto smirked. I'm aware of the stakes, sensei. I've been a target since who knows when. Aizawa's one visible eye narrowed. That kind of arrogance is what gets heroes killed, Akagi. Overconfidence is a flaw. Don't worry. Nizu probably took care of the paperwork, Haruto said. Aizawa let out a long sigh. Paperwork is just paper, Akagi, those villains saw what I saw. Well, Haruto said, pushing off the desk. We can't exactly revert time and redo the scene, can we? He paused, and looked at the void with dramatic sigh. Man, I really miss that little time machine watch. Well, take care of yourself, sensei. Try not to trip over your own bandages. With a casual two-finger salute, Haruto slid the door open and stepped out into the hallway. He caught up to Toru near the lockers, her invisible presence a warm constant in the cooling evening air. You're late, she whispered. What did he want? Just a technical checkup, Ghost-chan. He's worried I'll break the equipment tomorrow. Let's go. My mom's making katsudon, and I need the calories. We've got a long season ahead of us. Chapter 17, The Chaos Trio. The warehouse was like a cavern, the only light filtering through cracked skylights. In the center of the floor, 10 men scrambled around a series of heavy, reinforced crates. Move it. We're already 20 minutes behind, one villain barked, as he shoved a crate toward the loading bay. If the sun comes up before we're off the main road, we're dead men. It's not my fault the hydraulics jammed, another snapped. Just keep loading. We've got millions in high-end support tech sitting here. I don't like it, a third whispered. The silence in this place is too loud. We're sitting ducks. Stop complaining and lift, the leader hissed. Every second we waste is a second closer to a cape dropping through that roof. An amused chuckle drifted from the darkest corner of the warehouse. You know, you just jinxed it, a voice called out, dripping with irony. It's like you guys haven't ever seen an action movie in your life, you don't know the tropes. The villains spun around, weapons raised. From the shadows, a figure lounged casually on a stack of crates, one leg draped over the other. He wore a black hoodie and a Deadpool-style mask that seemed to smirk even without a mouth. A second Deadpool logo was crudely drawn across his chest, and two handguns strapped to a tactical belt. In his right hand, a silver coin spun lazily. Who the hell is this? The leader squinted, lowering his rifle slightly as he saw the figure's stature. Wait, is that a kid? Hey, brat! You picked the wrong night to play dress up. Get lost before we decide to use you for target practice. Target practice? Harsh, the figure said, you've got some real nice merchandise here. Care to share? I promise I'll return it, eventually. Probably. Now, are we going to do this the boring way where I have to use these little ones? He patted the pistols at his hips. Or are you going to realize you're just background extras and let me have the loot? I'm trying to keep the pacing brisk today. Kill the little punk, the leader barked. One villain, brimming with bravado and desperate to get back to the schedule, lunged forward with a quirk-enhanced blade. Bang! The gunshot was deafening. The villain's head snapped back, his momentum vanishing instantly as he dropped to the concrete like a sack of flour. The figure didn't even stand up. He just yawned and spun his coin again. The boring way it is, he sighed. Before the others could process the body on the floor, a knife whistled through the air from the opposite side of the room, burying itself in the shoulder of a man reaching for his holster. A girl stepped out from behind a pillar, her school sweater slightly oversized, her eyes shining with mischief. Ooh, that one sounded like squish, she chirped. Chaos erupted. The remaining 8 scrambled for cover, shouting over the ring of gunfire. Knives whistled through the air with precision as the girl danced between the shadows, her blades flashing in the dark. The figure stayed in his corner, leaning back against the wall. His movements calm, a tilt of the head to avoid a stray bullet, a flick of the wrist to fire precise shots. Across the room, tucked away in the shadows of the far corner, a man in a grey and black mask. His hands were clamped over his ears, he was hunched over, his head twitching with every gunshot as he watched the carnage. Within moments, the warehouse fell silent. All 10 villains lay unconscious, groaning or dead, on the floor, the smell of blood mixing with the sharp smell of gunpowder. The figure stood up, stretching his arms over his head. He looked over at the girl and the masked man, who was currently leaning against a wall, trying to catch his breath. The figure leaned back against the corner wall, spinning the coin lazily. Hi guys, it's been like, forever, he called casually. The girl pouted, crossing her arms, and the masked man huffed, still catching his breath. It's been boring. Why didn't you invite me to the fun at USJ? Haruto Yumini 8th, the girl complained. The masked man tilted his head, confused. Why would you want to be there, Toga-chan? He turned to face Haruto. But she's right. It's been already 2 months, Haruto, the man added. Oh, stop. You weren't forgotten, you were strategically delayed. The two groaned, still pouting, but their eyes gleamed with excitement. 6 months ago equals. The night air reeked of burnt rubber. A man was cornered by 2 uniformed cops. Come on, you can't catch me, the man shouted, dashing down the alley. But one misstep sent him crashing into a dumpster. Need a hand, a voice called from the shadows. Haruto emerged, spinning a coin in his hand. Who are you? The man said, pushing off the ground. Just a friendly neighborhood meddler, Haruto said, grinning. And judging by your predicament, you could use one. Predicament, the man muttered, rubbing his elbows. I didn't do anything wrong, okay? It's just, I was trying to get away from them because, well, they think I... He paused, swallowing hard. They think I stole a snack from a convenience store. But it wasn't my fault. The cashier freaked out. It's a misunderstanding. Haruto tilted his head, spinning his coin. You're running from the police over a snack? That's impressively dramatic. I like it. Okay, name's Haruto. What's yours? Jin. Jin Bubigawara, he muttered. And I swear, I'm not a criminal. I just panicked. Perfect. You're in. Haruto grinned. Now, let's make this little misunderstanding a lot more fun before we grab some katsudon. He didn't wait for a reply. Haruto vaulted over a low brick wall and reached back, and pulled Jin over. They hit the ground running. Within seconds, the two had vanished down a side street, leaving the sirens fading in the distance. Jin, breathing hard, finally looked at Haruto. Why did you help? Why not? Haruto shrugged, spinning the coin again. Besides, your whole vibe screams chaotic merc with a mask. I see myself in you, kid. A week later, Haruto and Jin were wandering the back streets. Jin was nervously looking over his shoulder, clearly regretting leaving the house. Seriously, why am I letting a kid drag me around like his henchman? Jin muttered. Relax, Jin, you worry too much. And I'm technically older than you by math, Haruto said. Suddenly, a glint of metal caught Haruto's eye. A small figure crouched near a dumpster, twirling a knife with high precision. That's dangerous, Jin whispered, inching back. Haruto, intrigued, stepped closer. Hey! Those are some neat tricks. The girl froze, then her eyes snapped toward him. In an instant, her knife lunged toward Haruto. Jin yelped. I told you! Dangerous! Haruto barely flinched, the blade grazing him before the wound healed instantly, the skin knitting together in seconds. He raised a hand to steady her, his voice calm. The girl froze. What? Sorry, kid, stabbing's kind of a non-issue for me. Comes bundled with the whole won't stay dead package, Haruto said. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level so his eyes met hers. His tone softened, just a bit. Hey, you look like you've had enough of people yelling at you, calling you crazy, forcing you to act like something you're not. He said, a small smirk on his face. So how about this instead? You hang out with us. No judging, just a little chaos and a lot of fun. Haruto, Jin cut in immediately. Can you not phrase it like that? I'm the one who's going to get arrested here. I'm already on thin ice as it is, I'm literally a decade older than you. Haruto waved him off without even looking. Relax, Jin. Don't go full tsundere on me. I know you're one bad day away from begging for company. I am not. I mean, I am, but that's not the point. Jin snapped, immediately contradicting himself. See? This is exactly what I mean. Haruto chuckled, then turned his attention back to her, expression softening again. So, what do you say? He asked, flipping the coin once and catching it. Interested? She hesitated, the knife lowering slowly. Her tense shoulders relaxed. You really don't care? Care? Nah. You didn't go for the kill, which, congratulations, earns you a gold star in my book. The name's Haruto, that over there is Jin. So, friends. She glanced at Jin, whose jaw was practically hitting the ground from embarrassment, and then slowly, she nodded. I'm Toga, okay, friends, she muttered. Friends it is. Welcome to the cast, Toga-chan, Haruto grinned. Jin sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I'm too old for this. Back to present equals 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 equals. The warehouse fell into a brief, heavy silence as Haruto's request hung in the air. Toga tilted her head, her knife pausing mid-twirl, while Jin's mask practically squinted in confusion. Wait, 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 Jin started waving his hands frantically. You want us to play bodyguard? To a guy with engines in his legs. I hate engines. They're loud. Vroom vroom. Let's go, I've always wanted to see a hero up close. Shut up. Yes, Haruto corrected, checking the action on his own sidearm. He's headed for an encounter with a blood-sucking weirdo with scarves and blades. Toga's eyes widened. The one with all the scarves? Stainy? Does he bleed? Can I have some? Stain is a buzzkill, Toga-chan. He's all conviction and society is fake, Haruto groaned. If Engine Legs goes after him alone, he's going to end up as a very expensive hospital bill. I need you two to make sure he stays in one piece. And for that, he kicked a heavy duffel bag toward them. It unzipped to reveal several sleek, black tactical pistols and a stack of mags. Take these. Jin stared at the cold steel. Guns? We use quirks. Pew pew. Why do we need the loud sticks? They're heavy. Haruto looked at the ceiling, exhaling a long sigh of frustration. Because they are practical, Jin. Honestly, it beats me why the mangaka suddenly decided that firearms are useless in a world where 90% of people still have squishy, human organs. You have any idea how much easier the USJ would have been if Shigaraki just brought a sniper rifle? Toga picked up a handgun, sniffing on the barrel with a delighted shiver. Practical. I like it. Does it make pretty holes? The prettiest, Haruto promised. Just don't kill the engine man. He's a side cast. If he dies, the tone of this whole arc gets way too dark, and I'm really trying to keep things at a PG-13 at school. Oh, and one very important tip for the boss fight, Haruto added, disgust showing on his face. Don't let him lick you. Toga froze, her head tilting like a bird. Lick? I want to lick him too. Gross, Toga-chan. No, Haruto groaned, shivering under his hoodie. His quirk is blood curdle. If he gets so much as a drop of your blood on his tongue, you're paralyzed. You'll be stuck on the pavement like a statue while he gives you a 10-minute monologue about true heroes. It's incredibly tedious. Jin shuddered, his hands reaching to his own throat. Paralyzed? I can't move. That's cheating. It's a total cheese build, Haruto nodded. That's why I gave you guns, they have a much better range than a guy with a tongue obsession. He looked at Toga, who was now pouting even harder. I know, you love the stabbing and tasting meta, Toga-chan. But trust me on this one. Stain's germs are a biological hazard even I wouldn't touch, and I can literally grow a new liver. Just keep your distance, and aim for the limbs, try not to kill him unless you have to. Jin tucked a pistol into his waistband, immediately nearly dropping it. Fine. We'll do it. We're gonna get arrested. It'll be fun. That's the spirit, Haruto grinned, spinning his coin one last time. One more thing, he added. Soon, a guy with a really bad case of eczema and way too many hands on his face is going to come looking for talent. His name is Shigaraki. He's basically an edgy gamer with issues. Jin froze, his hands flying to his own face. Hands. Gross. He's the league's frontman, Haruto continued. When he tries to recruit you, accept. Just sign the contract and move into the base. Toga pouted, her thumb tracing the edge of her knife. But the league is for villains. Bad guys. That's the thing, kids, Haruto said, leaning against the doorframe with a shrug. We aren't villains. We aren't heroes, either. Those are just labels people use to categorize the merchandise. We're just a group of friends having a bit of fun. Now go train with those guns. I've got a sports festival to pretend to care about. Chapter 18, The Sports Festival 1. The sports festival has started. The air in the stadium vibrated with the cheers of tens of thousands of people. Bakugo Katsuki! Midnight called out. The explosive blonde stepped up, looking at the crowd with disdain. I'm just gonna say it. I'm gonna be number one. As the crowd erupted in boos and Bakugo strolled back down. Haruto gave him a slow clap. Short, punchy, and aggressive. A solid 8 out of 10 Bakubro. Shut up, freak. And now, for the first event. Midnight shouted, a holographic screen appearing behind her. The obstacle race. As long as you stay on the track, you can do whatever your little hearts desire. The mouth of the tunnel was narrow. Haruto positioned himself right behind Todoroki, his knees bent in a runner's crouch. Start! Present Mix voice exploded. The buzzer cracked through the air. Without hesitation Shoto Todoroki ran forward, freezing the ground behind him. But Haruto was a step ahead, he was moving before the ice even touched the ground, he dived and rolled, popping up on the other side, already mid-sprint before the rest of the students could even gasp. Nice try, Elza-chan! Haruto looked over his shoulder, giving a mocking two-finger salute to a stunned Todoroki. Wait, look at that! Shoto Todoroki freezes the competition before they can even take their first step. But hold the phone. Someone just blitzed past the frost. Haruto Akagi from Class 1A just dived through the gap like he already knew the ice was coming. In the announcer's booth, Shota Aizawa, his face wrapped in bandages, leaned back in his chair analyzing the scene. He didn't hesitate for a second. It's not just speed. He read the situation before the buzzer even sounded. The cameras panned to the first major barrier, the gargantuan villain bots looming over the track. While the massive robots surged forward to block the path, Haruto didn't even slow down to engage. He leaped off the chest of one of them, using the massive machine as a simple stepping stone to vault 50 feet into the air, and hit the ground running. Check out Akagi. He's not even looking at them. He just used a robot as a springboard and vaulted the entire front line without breaking a sweat. Aizawa let out a tired sigh. He isn't wasting energy on combat he doesn't need to engage in. It's efficient. Haruto reached the edge of the fall well ahead of the pack. He didn't bother trying to balance on top like a circus act. Instead, he leaped off the ledge and snatched the cable from underneath. Haruto began to move with high-speed agility. Dangling over the bottomless pit, he swung his body forward, he was monkey-barring across the chasm at an abnormal speed. We've reached the second barrier, the fall. It's a tightrope walk over a bottomless abyss, but Akagi is. Is he going underneath? He's monkey-barring the cables. Look at those arms go. With one final, massive heave, he pulled himself upward from the dangling position, vaulting over the far ledge and landing in a perfect superhero three-point pose. Then he just kept running, his eyes fixed on the final obstacle, the minefield. And now, we've reached the final barrier. The minefield. It's designed so you can see where the mines are if you look carefully. So strain those eyes and wait, is he even looking? Haruto leaned forward, his boots digging into the dirt as he accelerated into a dead sprint. He charged into the field like a madman. To the spectators, it looked like suicide, but he was moving with a calculated pace. He wasn't dodging the mines, he was tanking them. Boom! A mine exploded directly under his left foot. But instead of flying randomly upward, he used the force of the blast to push himself forward, his durability turning a lethal explosion into a free boost. He's tanking the blasts. He's literally using the mines as booster pads. It's impressive, Aizawa muttered. But it's incredibly taxing on the body. He's gambling on his own endurance, and it's working. Past the minefield. Haruto's knees buckled slightly. He began to draw an act, about a cramped calf. But then he looked at the scoreboard. The massive digital display was already showing the rankings. Something about the way the cameras were perfectly positioned to catch a victory made his senses tingle. You know what? Haruto muttered, his wobbly legs suddenly snapping back into action. The humble runner-up trope is getting a bit played out. With a burst of strength, he bypassed the photo finish entirely, crossing the white line a full 3 seconds before Midoriya's desperate lunge could even reach the ribbon. And the winner is Haruto Akagi. He didn't just lead the whole race, he blitzed the finish like he was bored of waiting for the competition. Haruto didn't stop to pant. He skidded to a halt, spun around, and struck a Bully Maguire victory dance. Midoriya tumbled across the line in second, gasping for air, followed immediately by a snarling Bakugo and a frozen Todoroki. The stadium was in an absolute frenzy. The mysterious wild card had just dominated the most prestigious school event in the country without a visible flashy quirk. It was a calculated risk, Aizawa muttered into his mic, though even he sounded slightly impressed. He played with them until the very end, then showed his real speed. He's got insane stamina. Midoriya tumbled across the line seconds later, followed by a screaming Bakugo and a silent Todoroki. The massive holographic scoreboard flickered, the names of the students rearranging themselves into the final standing. Haruto strolled over to the breathless Midoriya and offered a hand, pulling the trembling boy to his feet. First place, Deku-kun, it's a lot of weight to carry. I figured I'd take the target off your back for the next round. Consider it a birthday gift. The second round. First Haruto Akagi. Second Izuku Midoriya. Third Katsuki Bakugo. Fourth Shoto Todoroki. The 42 of you who made it through the qualifiers have earned the right to move on, she proclaimed. But the real trial starts now. Behold! The cavalry battle. After she finished explaining the rules, Midnight's grin widened as she locked eyes with Haruto, who was casually stretching his hamstrings. You have 15 minutes to negotiate and form your teams. Choose wisely, because everyone in this stadium is coming for those 10 million points. Except for first place, Midnight's grin turned wicked. The person who took the top spot is worth 10 million points. Every head in the stadium snapped toward Haruto. He stood alone as a circle of empty space formed around him. Look at them, Haruto muttered. Cowards. He bypassed the main cast and walked straight over to Mei Hatsum. Hatsum-chan, Haruto chirped, leaning into her personal space. How would you like to be the sole engineer for a two-person show? Mei's goggles whirred, her crosshairs locking onto his mask. Only 2 people. Forget the risk, think about marketing. If we go in with a full team, your babies have to share the spotlight with 3 other quirks. It's bad branding. But a 2-person squad. He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the hovering camera drones circling the stadium. I'm talking about 3 minutes of uninterrupted, prime-time advertising. Mei's face split into a grin, her eyes practically turning into yen signs. A solo-sponsored technical showcase. I like the way you think, Akagi-kun. My babies deserve the exclusive center stage. Exactly, Haruto chirped. But I need you to take the safety limiters off your thrusters, crank them to maximum output. I'm going to outrun the frame rate. Mei's goggles whirred. Maximum output? The backlash would turn a normal human's joints into jelly. I've got the durability patch, Mei-chan. I'll endure the recoil, you just hold on and keep the fuel pumping. And do you have some kind of a shield? A shield. Mei's eyes widened, her zoom functions clicking rapidly. A physical barrier? A protective casing for my precious babies. Not for your babies, it's for you? Something like a premium windshield. Mei's face split into a grin. I have just the thing, the Aeroshell Mark IV. It's a deployable kinetic dampener with a reinforced polymer view screen. But it's heavy, Akagi-kun. It adds another 20 kilos of dead weight. Weight is not a problem, Haruto interrupted, testing the balance of the new hardware. Around them, the bustling crowd of students formed a frantic tide of negotiations. Yet no one dared to approach the 10 million point man, except for the pink-haired gearhead currently bolting a thruster to his back. Izuku Midoriya stood with his team, his notebook vibrating in his hand. He stared at Haruto and Mei, a team of two, standing completely isolated in the center. Two people. Midoriya muttered, his eyes darting across Haruto's gear. The mobility is higher, sure, but the defensive gap. They have no flanks, no rear guard. A few yards away, Bakugo Katsuki was literally smoking. His eyes were locked on the 10 million headband tied around Mei's neck. Only two of them? Is that freak looking down on us? He growled, his palms crackling with mini explosions. I'm gonna blast that smug grin right off his face. Shoto Todoroki narrowed his eyes, his right side already beginning to frost over. It's a provocation, he wants us to overextend. Don't fall for the bait. We corner them, trap them in ice, and the points are ours. Chapter 19, The Sports Festival 2. Haruto stood at the base with Mei locked firmly on his shoulders, the shield in front of her. He wore a pair of hover boots with an oversized experimental thrusters directly tied to his back. Get ready, Mei-chan. Hold on tight. We're cranking up speed. 3, 2, 1, start. Present Mix voice exploded. The field surged. Todoroki's eyes spread through the dirt, and Bakugo launched himself like a rocket. Kaboom! With a roar of blue flame, Haruto began to slide in a perfect circle around the field. Mei screamed from his shoulders, her hair flying back. The magnetic flux is holding. Look at the data, Akagi-kun. I can't see anything but brown and green. Haruto yelled back, his voice vibrating from the sheer RPM. The field was a chaotic mess. Haruto and Mei were a blur, a localized hurricane. From the east, Tetsu turned his entire body into steel and charged head first. I don't care how fast you're spinning. Metal doesn't low. He dove toward the vortex, aiming for Haruto's legs. Tetsu was snatched into the orbit for a split second before being yeeted out the other side like a pinball. Tetsu! Monoma shrieked, his eyes wide. This is ridiculous. From the north, Todoroki slammed his foot down. A massive glacier surged forward, a wall designed to stop the spinning pair. His durability along with the windshield locked him into an unbreakable projectile. Crack shatter. The stadium shook as Haruto's frame met the ice, piercing through it. Shards of ice exploded outward in a 360-degree radius, forcing every other teams to dive for cover. Bakugo tried to blast his way into their path, but the wind pressure deflected him like a discarded soda can. You looking freak! Bakugo roared, smoke rising from his palms. Get back here and fight like a man. Nice try, Sparky. But your splash damage is negligible against the power of Beyblades. Haruto's voice was a series of Doppler effect echoes. What is this? They're not moving. They're just spinning in the center of the field. Present Mike shouted. He's kiting the entire stadium. Aizawa muttered. That is stupidly effective. The merry-go-round of doom. The stadium was in an absolute frenzy. The audience wasn't even cheering for the combat anymore, they were laughing at the sheer absurdity. Mineta tried to throw sticky balls into the trench, but they were caught in the wind and whipped back at him. Ida tried to match the speed with his recipro burst, but the air pressure around Haruto was so intense he couldn't even get within 5 feet. The final 30 seconds. The other teams took one look at the spinning death hurricane, and collectively decided they valued their bones. They gave up on chasing Haruto and Mei, redirecting their attention to easier targets. 10 seconds. Midnight screamed. 3, 2, 1, time's up. And the winners are Haruto Akagi and Mei Hatsum. The round ended, but Haruto was still spinning, slowing down bit by bit until they eventually stopped. Mei hopped off his shoulders, frantically scribbling notes on a charred tablet. Akagi-kun. The friction-to-torque ratio was off the charts. We stayed in the exact same coordinates for 98% of the match. My babies are famous. Yeah, and I think I've permanently rearranged my internal organs, Haruto joked, dusting off his clothes. But hey, look at the board. Number 1, and I didn't even break a sweat. He looked up at the massive screen where his name sat atop the leaderboard, glowing in gold. A familiar, explosive presence cut through the air. Kirishima was already there, arms wrapped tightly around Bakugo's torso from behind, heels digging into the dirt as he tried to hold him back. Bro, calm down. You're gonna pop a vein. Bakugo was practically fuming with rage, smoke curling from his palms. Let me go. I'm gonna blow that spinning clown apart. Ah, don't be like that. I love you too, Baku bro. Really, I do, Haruto said, blowing a mock kiss toward the fuming student. Just wait. I'll crush you in the next round. Yeah, sure. See you in the next round. Just try not to explode emotionally before that, yeah. The scoreboard on the stadium's massive monitors flickered one last time, the numbers flickering, before freezing to reveal the final 4 teams moving on to the championship tournament. The stadium was silent for a heartbeat before erupting into a deafening roar as the names locked into place. First Haruto Akagi, 10 million. Second Shoto Todoroki, 1,425. Third Katsuki Bakugo, 980. Fourth Izuku Midoriya, 710. The adrenaline of the cavalry battle had begun to simmer. Most of the students had already retreated to the cafeteria to refuel. Haruto was already in the hallway, leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed. He didn't move as he heard the sound of footsteps approaching him. Midoriya jumped, nearly tripping over his own feet. With his notebook already out. Behind him, Ida marched with his usual rigid posture, though his engines were still hissing with steam. Akagi-kun. Midoriya started, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. He pulled out his notebook, his pen hovering over a fresh page. The way you adjusted your center of gravity while maintaining that RPM, you weren't just spinning. You were creating a localized low-pressure zone to deflect Bakugo's heat signatures, wasn't you? To maintain such a high-speed defensive perimeter, it was risky, Akagi-kun. But I must admit, your spatial awareness was formidable. Ida added, chopping the air. Haruto tilted his head, confused. Is that what I was doing? Wow, guys, you make me sound like a genius. I just thought I was being a very expensive human Beyblade. Before Midoriya could offer a technical rebuttal about centrifugal force, a bubbly voice echoed down the hall. Deku-kun. Haruto-kun. Yurarika came jogging toward them, her face flushed red from the exertion, with a pair of floating gym gloves, Toru Hagakure, bobbing along beside her in a state of invisible excitement. That was amazing. Yurarika cheered, leaning over to catch her breath. I really thought we were done for when the points started flying, but we actually made the top 4. Yet. Toru's gloves waved frantically, narrowly missing Midoriya's nose. Haruto, you were like a blur out there. Every time I tried to slip into your blind spot, you just spun. I couldn't even see where to grab. It's all physics, boys. Action, reaction. I just figured if I spun fast enough, I'd turn into a Looney Tunes dust cloud. Well, whatever the science behind it is, you're the one with the target on your back now, Haruto-kun. Yurarika chirped, giving a determined nod. We better go refuel. Coming, Deku-kun? Ida-kun. Right. We'll see you out there, Akagi-kun. Midoriya said, casting one last analytical look at Haruto before tucking his notebook away. The group moved off toward the cafeteria. Haruto stayed where he was, his back still pressed against the wall. He waited until the sound of their footsteps had completely vanished before he let out a long exhale. Eavesdropping is a bit of a villain move, don't you think? Haruto said, not turning his head. Shoto Todoroki stepped from the shadows. His expression was as frigid, his eyes fixed on Haruto. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was waiting for them to leave, Todoroki said. In the tunnel, you moved before I even touched the ground, Todoroki continued, his eyes narrowing. And in the cavalry battle, you did that spinning thing, followed a perfect circular path, that requires control, it's not just physics. Haruto finally turned his head, meeting that frozen stare with a lazy, unbothered grin. You're overthinking it, Ice King. Maybe I just have really good ears. Regardless of how you do it, I'm only here to tell you one thing, I have no intention of losing to you. Wait, Haruto said, holding up a hand. That line, isn't that supposed to be for Midoriya? You're getting your dramatic declarations mixed up, Shoto. Todoroki's brow furrowed slightly, his stoic mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? Nothing, Haruto waved it off, his grin turning sharp. Just feels like I'm stealing someone else's spotlight. But hey, if you want to make me your big rival for the afternoon, I'm not gonna stop you. Just make sure to tune up the heat. Haruto didn't wait for a response this time. He strolled down the hall, his hands behind his head. See you in the bracket, Prince Zuko. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets, his gaze dropping to the floor as his mind drifted away. Man, I wonder how the boys are doing. It's boring in here. Chapter 20, Rescuing Betel Man. Tensei Ida, known to the public as the Turbo Hero, Ingenium, kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning every narrow gap between the buildings. He pressed his fingers to the communicator in his helmet. Team A, check the north sector, Tensei commanded. Team B, check the west. He cut the connection and rounded a corner, his mufflers clicking as he slowed his pace. There was a mundane alleyway, filled with the smell of damp cardboard. He almost passed it, until a flash of tattered red fabric caught his eye. Tensei stopped dead in his tracks. He turned back and jumped into the alleyway. There, standing in the darkness, with a jagged blade in hand, was the nightmare of the hero world. Found him! Tensei shouted into his comms. The hero killer! Tensei felt the air shift. The hero killer was gauging the distance. I won't let you kill anyone else, Tensei declared, his mufflers clicking into high output mode. You're surrounded, Stain. My team is blocks away. Drop the weapons and turn yourself in. Don't make me take you down by force. Stain let out a dry, hacking laugh. He raised the jagged blade, pointing the tip directly at Tensei's throat. Then show me, Ingenium. Show me if your duty is faster than my justice. Without hesitation Tensei lunged, a blur of white armor. In a flash of movement, 4 throwing daggers whistled through the air. Tensei ducked, the blades embedding themselves deep into the wall behind him. He surged forward again, aiming a series of rapid-fire strikes. Thud. Clack. Shing. The alleyway was too narrow for Tensei to reach top speed, and Stain knew it. The hero killer was playing a game of inches, leading Tensei into tighter and tighter corners. Tensei swung a white hook, but his foot slipped on a patch of moss. It was a millisecond of imbalance, but for Stain, it was eternity. Stain's eyes gleamed with light. He lunged forward, his blade grazing Tensei's shoulder, slicing through his armor. Tensei grunted, feeling the sting of the metal, but he didn't slow down. He grabbed Stain's wrist, intending to pin him against the wall. I've got you. No, Stain whispered, a gruesome smile stretching across his face. I have you. Stain pulled back, his tongue flickering out to catch a single drop of blood from the edge of his blade. Tensei's heart went cold. He'd heard about the mysterious paralysis that struck Stain's victims. He tried to ignite his engines for a final, desperate burst to clear the alley, but his legs suddenly felt like lead. The hum of his mufflers died down. Tensei's knees buckled, and he collapsed, his armor clattering loudly against the ground. Stain stood over him, he raised his long katana, the tip hovering right over Tensei's spine. You have conviction, Stain admitted, his voice cold. May your sacrifice be the spark that wakes the real heroes, or the fire that consumes the fakes. Boo-ring. A sudden shadow dropped from the dumpsters. Jin, twice, landed. He didn't even look at the hero killer, he just grabbed the paralyzed hero's arm trying to lift him. This guy is heavy. Stain's eyes narrowed to slits. More maggots interfering with justice. Stain didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his sword aimed straight for Twice's back to stop the rescue. His blade inches away from carving through them both. Bang! Bang! 2 shots rang out, the bullets snapping through the air right in front of Stain's face. The hero killer hissed, forced to flip backward to avoid getting shot in the head. He landed in a crouch, his eyes darting upward. Haru-kun said the monologue was the worst part, a high-pitched, girlish voice chirped. Toga stood on a rusty fire escape, her signature combat mask covering her face. You talk a lot, Stainy. It makes it really easy to hit you. Toga laughed, her voice playful behind the mask. Jin. Go. I'll play with him for a bit. Right. I'm leaving. Make sure you don't get licked, Toga-chan. Jin screamed. He scooped Tensei over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. Tensei was heavy, but the panic gave Jin a burst of strength. He started sprinting toward the end of the alley. Stain growled and tried to jump after them, but Toga dropped from the fire escape, landing in his path. She kept her distance, her gun pointed right at his chest. Bang! 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 She fired 3 more times. Every time Stain tried to close the gap, she shot at his feet or his lead shoulder, forcing him to weave and dodge. She was zoning him perfectly, keeping a 20-foot gap between his blades and her body. Who are you? Stain roared, his killing intent flaring. More fakes playing dress up. We aren't heroes, Stainy, Toga said, her voice buzzing behind the teeth of her mask. She fired another shot, grazing Stain's sleeve. We're only here because Haru-kun said you aren't allowed to harm the side characters today. Stain threw a handful of daggers, but Toga dove behind a dumpster, the metal clanging as the knives hit. She popped back up instantly. Stain didn't retreat this time, he sprinted along the vertical surface of the brick wall, defying gravity as he closed the distance. Bang! 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 Toga tracked him, her shots kicking up dust from the ground just inches behind his heels. Stain leaped from the wall, spinning mid-air, his katana outstretched to shear through her guard. Toga slid beneath the strike, the wind of the blade ruffling her buns, and fired upward at his torso. Stain used the flat of his blade to parry the bullet, and landed in a crouch. You're fast, girl, but you're reliant on a finite toy. Stain hissed, his eyes tracking the slide of her pistol. Finite? Haru-kun gave me spare mags, Stainy. I can do this all day. Toga chirped, though her breathing was getting heavier. She backed away, maintaining the 20-foot gap. Stain lunged again, this time throwing a heavy wooden junk to distract her. Toga shot at mid-air, splintering it, but Stain was already through the debris, swinging his jagged katana at her. Toga parried the blow with the frame of her pistol, a risky move that left a deep gouge in the metal, and kicked him in the knee, forcing him back just enough to level the barrel at his chest. Click! The sound was tiny, but it echoed in the silence of the alley. The slide was locked back. The chamber was empty. "Oh," Toga said, her smile widening behind the teeth of her mask. "Out of candy." Stain's lips curled into a snarl. He lunged, his katana aiming for a non-lethal but crippling strike to her thigh. Toga didn't reach for another magazine. She looked over her shoulder and saw that the alley was finally empty. Jin and Tensei were gone, having vanished into the bright, orange glow of the main street. "Job's done," Toga chirped. As Stain's blade whistled toward her, she reached into a pouch on her belt and slammed a purple sphere onto the ground right between them. Poof! A massive cloud of thick smoke erupted, filling the alleyway instantly. Stain roared and slashed his katana through the mist, but his blade hit nothing but air. Toga was already halfway up a rusted drainpipe, moving with the agility of a spider before disappearing into the light. Stain's eyes burned with murderous intent. He ignored his bleeding shoulder and sprinted toward the pipe. He wasn't going to let the girl escape. He was beginning to chase after her, when a sharp tang echoed through the alley. A sleek, black-handled combat knife struck the metal drainpipe just inches above Stain's reaching hand. Stain halted, but before he could look back, he felt a cold hand rest on his shoulder. "Easy there, Kenshin. You're moving a little too fast," a voice whispered from behind him. "You can't go chasing after schoolgirls in dark alleys. That's a different kind of villain vibe." Stain spun around, his notched blade whistling through the air in a perfect horizontal decapitation strike. But the blade met zero resistance. The figure in the red and black mask ducked down, letting the katana pass through the empty space where his neck had been a millisecond before. He stayed down there on the pavement, sitting, looking up at the hero killer with an exaggeratedly calm tilt of the head. "Ooh, close," Haruto said, his voice completely unbothered. "But you've got that look in your eye. That I am about to murder a teenager because she broke my immersion look. It's a bad look, Stainy. Also, your scarf is tacky." "There, I said it. It's a crime against fashion." Stain roared, a sound of pure primal fury, and unleashed a flurry of stabs downward. He wanted to shred the intruder. His blades tore through the black fabric and the mask, burying themselves into the figure's chest and shoulders. But there was no blood. The figure dissolved into a thick, grey sludge that splattered across the alley floor. As he disintegrated, his head remained for some time, looking up at Stain. "Anyway, edgelord, don't forget to wash your tongue before you go to bed. The germs are having a party there. Check you later." Stain stood over the pile of grey goo, his chest heaving with rage as the last of the clone vanished into nothingness. In a quiet park nearby, well away from the shadows, Jin dropped Tensei onto the dry grass. The man in the grey bodysuit was gasping for air, leaning his back against a thick oak tree. Tensei Ida lay on the ground, the feeling finally beginning to tingle back into his fingertips as the paralysis started to fade. He looked up, his breathing ragged. Toga simply appeared from the sidewalk, walking casually toward them with her hands behind her back. "That was fun. Stainy is so grumpy. He really needs a hobby," she said with a giggle, strolling up to them as if she hadn't just been in a life-or-death duel. She stopped and lightly kicked at the grass, checking the new scratch on her pistol with a pout. Tensei looked at the two of them, a man in a mask and a girl who acted like they had just finished a game of tag. He felt a wave of confusion that surpassed even his physical pain. You saved me. Thank you. But you used weapons, are you vigilantes?" Toga looked at the hero as if he had asked a very complicated math question. She turned her gaze toward her partner. "Right. What are we, Jin?" He looked back at her, confused. "I don't know, Toga-chan. Whenever I ask boss about it, he just starts rambling about branding and copyright lawsuits. He's just too lazy to think of a name." Toga giggled, poking Jin in the arm. "Wait a moment," Tensei said, his voice regaining its authoritative pro-hero edge. He pointed a finger at Jin, who was still catching his breath against the tree. "You're an adult. And she is clearly, what, 16? 17? Jin froze, his mask twitching. "I'm 30. I'm a baby. Why is everyone pointing at me? This is a serious violation." Tensei barked, trying to stand but stumbling back onto the grass. "You have a minor, armed with a firearm, wearing a school uniform. Are you her handler? Are you, enticing a minor into a life of crime?" Jin's hands flew to his masked head, his voice spiraling into a frantic panic. "No. I'm the victim here." Toga didn't look offended, she looked delighted. She skipped over to Jin and linked her arm through his, leaning her head on his shoulder with a manic grin. "He's my best friend, Beetle Man. We're like a high-stakes after-school club. He is leading you down a dark path, young lady." Tensei insisted, his hero instincts overriding his common sense. "Sir, step away from the girl. You are under arrest for being a highly suspicious guardian." "Arrested? Finally, some structure in my life. I'm a free spirit, you'll never take me alive. Do they have a dental plan in there? Because I haven't seen a doctor since the quirk registry." "He's not a kidnapper," Toga said, waving her empty pistol casually at Tensei. "If anything, boss is the one you should worry about. He's the one who said child labor is just a fancy term for scouting talent before they get expensive. That doesn't make it better." Tensei roared as they vanished into the twilight. "That makes it significantly worse." She reached down and patted Tensei's helmet one last time. "Just stay put, Beetle Man. The real heroes and the police will be here in a few minutes, okay?" With a final, playful wave, Toga turned and began walking away just as casually as she had arrived, with Jin scrambling to catch up to her. Chapter 21, Paranoia. The display above the stadium flared to life, showing the results of the first round. Block A Midoriya Izuku, W, vs Shinso Hitachi. Todoroki Shoto, W, vs Zero Hanta. Shiozaki, W, Ibara vs Kaminari Denki. Ida Tinya, W, vs Meihatsum. Block B Tokoyami Fumi Cage, W, vs Yaeorozu Momo. Bakugo Katsuki, W, vs Yurarika Okako. Kirishima Ajiro, W, vs Ashido Mina. Haruto Akage vs Yuga Aoyama. Alright, hero fans. We've saved the brightest for last. Present Mix voice shook the speakers. On one side, the shining prince, Yuga Aoyama. And on the other, Haruto Akage, who looks like he's about to take a nap. Aoyama struck a pose, his teeth glinting. "Akage-kun. The world is watching. We must provide them with a spectacle that..." Haruto wasn't listening, he was busy picking a piece of lint off his sleeve. "Can we skip the monologue, Sparkles? I'm not in the mood." Midnight raised her whip, glancing at Haruto's indifferent expression. "Start? Naval laser!" Aoyama shouted, thrusting his hips. The air. In the same microsecond, Haruto's expression didn't change, his body moved with efficiency, as he slipped the beam. With a slight tilt of his torso, the laser whistled past his ribs, missing him by a fraction of an inch. While Aoyama was still committed to the thrust, Haruto was already closing the gap. His feet blurred. He covered the distance in 2 heavy strides. "Wait, non! Stay back!" Aoyama panicked, trying to sweep the beam across the ring to catch him. But Haruto was already inside his guard. He ducked under the swinging arc of the laser, the heat touching the very tips of his hair, and rose up directly in front of Aoyama. His frame cast a long shadow over the blonde boy. "Are you done?" Haruto asked, his voice flat. He didn't use a flashy move. He simply put a hand on Aoyama's shoulder. The weight of Haruto's hand alone made the blonde's knees buckle. It felt like someone had dropped a bowling ball on a toothpick. Wait, wait. Let us discuss the aesthetics of Goodbye, Disco Ball. Haruto grabbed the back of Aoyama's tracksuit and his belt. And casually, as if tossing a crumpled piece of paper toward a trash can, threw him away. Aoyama went sailing horizontally, as he soared out of the ring. Thump. Aoyama out of bounds. Haruto Akagi advances. The crowd was half cheering, half confused. The match had lasted less than 30 seconds. Haruto was already halfway to the tunnel before Aoyama had stopped rolling on the grass. As he entered the shadows of the hallway, he ran into Kirishima, who was warming up for the next round by hardening his arms. Whoa, Akagi. That was efficient. Kirishima grinned. Ready for our match in the quarters? It's gonna be a real man's battle. Haruto stopped, looked at Kirishima's hardened, jagged arms, and then looked at the ceiling. Yeah, sure. He kept walking, leaving a very confused Kirishima behind. In the stands, the silence among Class 1A was heavy. While the rest of the stadium was still trying to process the sub-30-second fight, Midoriya Izuka was analyzing Haruto's movement patterns. He just picked him up like a bag of laundry. Uraraka blinked. It wasn't just that, Midoriya muttered, his eyes narrowed. Haruto-kun is always efficient, but this was different. He didn't even look Aoyama in the eye. He seems totally off, Kaminari added, rubbing the back of his neck. Normally he'd have cracked 3 jokes about Aoyama's light beam before ending the fight. Tsuyu tapped her chin with a finger. Ribbit. It's a bit scary, actually. He doesn't look like himself. Did something happen? Midoriya muttered, as he watched Haruto's retreating figure. Maybe he's just focused. Toru suggested, her voice popping up from her seat behind them. You know how he is. He probably just wants to get to the finals so he can go home and sleep. Mina Ashido suddenly leaned over the back of her chair, a mischievous glint in her eyes as she pointed a finger toward the invisible girl. Wait, wait, wait. Is that a hint of inside info I hear? Mina grinned, her voice dripping with curiosity. Come on, Toru. Spill it. Are you two actually dating? How do you know him so well? Toru's gloves flew up to her invisible cheeks instantly, her entire frame jolting back in surprise. Wah! Dating? No. No, no, no. It's not like that at all. She waved her hands frantically, the fabric of her sleeves blurring with the speed of her panic. We're just best friends. Honestly. We've known each other since middle school, so I'm just used to his weird moods. But even for him, this is new. I really don't know what's going on with him today. Mina giggled, clearly enjoying the reaction, but Midoriya remained focused on the entrance of the tunnel. Quarter-finals. Ladies and gentlemen, we've seen elements and we've seen speed, but now we have raw physicality. On one side, the hard-boiled hero in training, Eijiro Kirishima. And on the other, the man who makes winning look like a chore, Haruto Akagi. Kirishima was already in the ring, his skin hardened. Come on, Akagi. Let's have a manly match. Haruto stepped into the ring. He neither looked at the crowd, nor the cameras. He just stared at the concrete floor, as if his mind was somewhere else. Midnight raised her whip. Start. Red counter. Kirishima yelled, his skin hardening into jagged armor. He unleashed a flurry of hooks and straights, each punch carrying enough force to shatter brick. Haruto tilted his head a fraction of an inch to let a jagged fist whistle past his ear. He stepped back just enough to let a heavy blow graze the air in front of his chest. His feet moved in small circles, his body pivoting on the spot with zero wasted energy. Come on, Akagi. Stand and fight. Kirishima roared, frustrated by the lack of impact. He lunged in for a massive overhead strike, pouring every ounce of his stamina into the blow. Haruto let out a long sigh. You're leaning into it, Red. Big mistake. As Kirishima's fist descended, Haruto stepped into the attack's blind spot. Instead of resisting the force, he reached out and caught Kirishima's arm and the back of his gym shirt, using the boy's own forward momentum against him. With a fluid rotation of his hips, a textbook Ippon Soinage, shoulder throw, Haruto helped Kirishima finish the journey he had started. Kirishima, fully hardened and heavy as a boulder, realized too late that he had no brakes. Haruto's strength redirected him like a railgun. Kirishima was launched through the air, soaring right over the boundary line. Crash! Kirishima slammed into the dirt outside the ring, his hardening quirk leaving a deep crater in the grass. Kirishima is out of bounds. Haruto Akagi advances. Midnight lowered her whip, looking back and forth between the crater and Haruto, who was already turning away. Manly! Kirishima groaned from the dirt, his skin returning to normal as he looked up at the sky. He didn't even break a sweat. After the fight, Haruto didn't head for the recovery room or the stands to bask in his victory. Instead, he ducked into a narrow maintenance closet in the tunnel. He locked the door and pulled his phone out. His thumb hovered over the screen. 30 unanswered calls. 0 replies. Damn it, Jin. Pick up, he hissed under his breath. The silence was the worst part. When he had asked Jin to make a clone of him, and take it with them, it had felt like a perfect plan, a safety net. Damn it, Haruto whispered, his fingers flying across the keypad. Haruto, did something happen? Report in. Now. He leaned his head against the cool metal of a shelf. The paranoia was a living thing, gnawing at the back of his mind. What if the Ingenium had actually called for backup faster than usual? What if Toga's bloodlust had finally overridden her common sense and she'd gone for a taste of the hero killer? I'm the one who told them to play this stupid bodyguard game, if I lose them because I wanted to save a secondary character's career. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. The stadium above him shook with roars. The vibrations traveled down through the concrete, rattling the mop buckets. He was supposed to be the cool, detached observer, the guy with the meta-knowledge who treated life like a game. But standing in the dark and feeling the crushing weight of not knowing, he felt less like a gamer and more like a parent who had sent their kids into a war zone with nothing but a couple of Glocks and wishful thinking. I'm done. I'm going. He shoved the phone into his pocket. He reached for the door handle, intending to slip out the service exit and vanish into the city. But suddenly, the phone buzzed. He pulled the phone back, nearly dropping it, fumbling to swipe the screen open. A single photo message had finally downloaded. Jin, boss. Sorry. Toga-chan saw a crepe stand and then we saw a shop with those weird cat plus highs. My phone died. We're at the station heading back now. Did you win? Underneath was a shaky photo, Toga, face smeared with strawberry sauce and clutching a plush cat, and Jin in the background giving a double thumbs up. Haruto's head hit the cool metal of the locker next to him. I am going to kill them, he whispered, the sheer relief washing over him. I am actually going to murder them both. He unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. And moments later he ran into the invisible girl. Haruto. There you are. The sleeves of a UA track jacket bobbed anxiously in front of him. Toru Hagakure was standing in the center of the hallway. Everyone's been looking for you. You disappeared right after the match, she said. She stepped closer, her hands reaching out as if to check him for injuries. Are you okay? You look really pale. Did something happen? Did Kirishima actually get a hit in? Do we need to find recovery girl? Haruto leaned back against the concrete wall. He let out a long yawn, his eyes drooping with indifference. The frantic parent who had been ready to storm Hoso was gone. Relax, Toru-chan. No need to call the morgue or the Avengers, I'm fine, he muttered, his voice returning to its usual tone. But you locked yourself in a maintenance closet. We thought you'd collapsed from the strain or... I was just looking for a quiet place to have a power nap. The stadium is too loud. I figured a dark closet was the best bet for 20 minutes of peace. Turns out, it's actually pretty comfortable if you lean against the mops just right. Toru went silent for a moment, her head presumably tilting in disbelief. You were napping? Haruto. You're in the semi-finals. You're up against Bakugo next. How can you be sleepy right now? Toru-chan. Honestly, I've never been a big fan of the whole school tournament arc trope. I was just bored and looking for a skip button, he said, pushing off the wall and walking past her with a casual wave. Tell the others to stop the search party. I'm going to find some caffeine before Sparky tries to blow my head off. I'd hate to fall asleep mid-explosion. As he walked away, his hand stayed firmly in his pocket, gripping the phone. He could still see that photo of Toga's strawberry-smeared face in his mind. Idiots. Absolute idiots, he thought, with a faint glint in his eyes. But at least now I have someone to take my frustration out on.